that is not really being addressed by academia, and we at ISGAP are here to provide you with some of the best experts in the world dealing with issues of anti-Semitism. And scholars will also help you to develop curriculum for the professors here who are developing courses. Will actually help you develop your courses based on your area of expertise.
Recording in progress.
And for the Elie Martin Luther King scholars, hey, you'll be here and you'll have group leaders, and we'll help you, and the group leaders will help you to develop a project to take back to campus. So we have distinguished guests online, and sometimes when people are waiting on Zoom, they're not really, Zoom is amazing, but everybody's a little bit kind of a step removed. So what I propose that we do is that we'll ask the speakers who are with us on Zoom to give their first remarks soon, in a few minutes. And then when they're done speaking, I'll give a proper introduction, and I want to introduce you to the ISGAP team. And I would also like to go around the room, and I'd like to hear from you, if you can introduce yourselves to the group as well. So we'll do that, I think, once our distinguished guests speak with us virtually. So the first person that I'd like to call on is Natan Sharansky. Natan is the chair of ISGAP, which is a tremendous honor for us at ISGAP. Natan, as many of you know, and there's some young people in the room, so I don't know if you know the history, but Natan led a human rights movement in the former Soviet Union and was a dissident, a human rights dissident for freedom, cultural freedom and political freedom in the former Soviet Union, and was not only a leader, but actually served in prison for many years in the Soviet Union because he wanted Jewish people to have the right to practice their culture and religion and to live in Israel as free people. And he paid the ultimate price. And fortunately, for all sorts of reasons which we could discuss during the 2 weeks, he was able to be released from prison and went to Israel, where he made Aliyah and became a citizen, and eventually became a leader in the Israeli government and served in various ministerial positions for 7 years, and then went on to be the head of the Jewish Agency, which is a parapublic organization, institution out of Israel that deals with Jewish communities throughout the world in the diaspora. So he's an esteemed international human rights activist, political leader. He's written very important books on issues of anti-Semitism and on Jewish culture, and it's really a privilege that Natan is with us to provide the opening remarks. So Natan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Charles. Dear friends, I hope to be personal with you in 2 days and to give my lecture, but now I'm glad to welcome you from Jerusalem, just in our last minutes of our fast on Tisha B'Av. Remember Tisha B'Av, that's the day of mourning for the destruction of the temple, but it's also the day when some of the biggest tragedies happened, like expulsion from Spain, some pogroms of Nazis, at least many other tragedies. It's also not only the last minutes of finishing our fast. I hope it's the first minutes of the ceasefire, of the kind of war in the south of our border. So the silence will not stop me, and I'll make my few welcome remarks. Dear friends, it's a real pleasure that after 2 years, thanks to the efforts of Charles and our faculty team, we can resume this tradition. The anti-Semitism, unfortunately, has many faces and can easily move from one direction to the other. I remember how the awful cartoons of Nazi times against Jews were turning into the cartoons against Israel in Soviet times, and sometimes it happens today. And vice versa, how this anti-Zionist propaganda and cartoons against Israel still returning Soviet press the cartoons against Fifth Column, the Jewish citizens of Soviet Union. And in a modern world, sometimes anti-Semitism is part of progressive movement, and sometimes of anti-progressive, conservative movement. When I was fighting Marxist dictatorship in Soviet Union, some people were very happy to remind me that it is Jews who invented Marxism, beginning from Marx himself, and they imposed this class struggle and divide of the world on privilege and privilege. And today we hear when progressivism is again in fashion. We can hear how Jews belong to privilege, and that's why the fight against racism and the fight against anti-Semitism cannot be the same. But that's why for the success it is very important to fight anti-Semitism simultaneously on all the fronts. And that's why it is so important, the seminar, which I think is one of the most important things which, thanks to energy and the ideas of Charles, was created. So important that in a short period of time we will be able to hear about different phases of anti-Semitism and then try to integrate it in your work. So I hope you have a very successful seminar. I personally am going to join you like in 48 hours or something like this, and have a very good seminar. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thank you for your opening remarks, and we look forward to seeing you in Oxford soon. So thank you. The next speaker, it's an honor another great honor to be able to introduce to you Dr. Ali Al-Noemi. Dr. Al-Noemi currently serves as the I'm being stopped by my colleague. All right, cool, thank you. As the chairman, is the original first founding chairman of the International Steering Board of Hadaya, an international center of excellence for countering violent extremism. It's based in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. He's also the founder and chairman of the World Council of Muslim Communities. In addition, Dr. Al-Noemi is a founding member of the Forum for Promoting Peace in Muslim Societies and the first Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Elders. Dr. Al-Noemi is also the founder and chairman of the Al-Majal Media conglomerate and the editor-in-chief of Al-Ayan News portal, which provides comprehensive news to the Arab world. Additionally, he's the founder of 7D, which is a news-based organization in London. Dr. Al-Noemi served as the Chancellor of the United Arab Emirates University and the Chairman of Abu Dhabi Department of Education and Knowledge in his capacity as the member of the Executive Council of the Government of Abu Dhabi. And it's a great pleasure not only to be able to have him as our guest in our initial meeting, but it also, on a personal note, I think those of us who have connections to the Middle East and to the region, it's amazing in the last year and a half or 2 years or so, maybe a bit longer, that there really is the beginning of a warm peace that's gaining traction at many levels, not just economic and political, but also cultural. And I know that Dr. Al-Noemi was very instrumental in laying the groundwork for promoting the Abraham Accords and to bring the United Arab Emirates and Israel closer together. And in the struggle against anti-Semitism and bigotry and trying to promote humility and tolerance and respect, his work is really of great importance to the region and ultimately to the world. And it's becoming a bright spot, I think, in many of the issues that we'll discuss in the next 2 weeks. So Dr. Al-Noemi, the floor is yours, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charles. It's good to see you again. And thank you very much for giving me the privilege and the honor to be part of this engagement. Also, I want to say hi to Nathan. It's good to see you again, and wish you, a pleasant day, and stay safe. I know the threat. I know what kind of threat are being there while you are joining us. So we pray for you stay safe. You know, dear student, professor, you know, it's very important when we talk about issues related to, you know, hate crime, which target us as human beings. It's very important that we create a narrative that we gain the heart and the mind of the people. We need to develop a new way to engage with others when it comes to anti-Semitism. I'm saying this because, you know, we all, you know, talk a lot about the Holocaust. We all talk about how the
נכנסתי, ואין לי את האייקון של המצב.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, let me continue. You know, I'm saying that we need a new approach. We need a new strategy because, you know, although the Holocaust happened in Europe, the people witnessed that tragedy. 6 million people, you know, they gave their lives, and we didn't learn the lesson yet. You know, it happened in Europe. Now in Europe, you know, hate crime are rising. Many Jewish, you know, people, temples or synagogue or other things that represent Jews actually are targeted, destroyed, you know, in the same place where the Holocaust happened. And this is show that although there is so many things has been done to counter that hate, to change the way that people look at each other as human beings, still there is a long way to go. And this is where it's very important when we talk about anti-Semitism. We have to bring others with us. It is not the Jewish method to counter and fight anti-Semitism. It's the world. It's all human beings. Because at the end, it might start with targeting Jews, but it won't end there. It will, you know, the target will, you know, will be all human beings. Because when you actually try to target a person because of his belief, that means, you know, you don't tolerate others, you don't accept others, you don't believe in coexistence, you know, you want to impose what you believe in on others. And this is where it's very important that we need to develop a strategy to counter anti-Semitism by bringing, you know, all others to engage with us, to feel that this is their responsibility, their battle, and, you know, we have to develop a strategy that uses especially the educational system, academia as a platform. And this is where, you know, I'd like to thank my friend Charles, you know, for seeing the importance of the university in that role. And this is where, you know, in the university we should have the courage, you know, and the willingness to move forward and engage with other students, with other professors, with other organizations, you know, in creating, you know, a platform where we will promote the coexistence, acceptance, respect, and counter hate, regardless of the source of the hate or the audience that are targeted. University, you know, we always, you know, because I'm an academician, we always, you know, strive to protect the freedom of the academia. I think it's part of freedom of academia actually to protect the human values that will bring us together regardless of our religion, and to counter hate regardless of the source or the audience of the hate. So, you know, I'd like to thank all those who engage in organizing such events. I believe that it's a long way, but we don't have a choice. We have to engage. And what's happening, especially in our region, in promoting hate, you know, give us, you know, show us that we have to work hard. We have to engage with others, And, we have to make a commitment, to counter hate, to counter anti-Semitism, and all other hate crime against human beings. Thank you very much. I wish you the best, and I'll see you again on August 10th.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being.
Just unmute yourself.
Thank you very much for being with us, and especially on our opening event. And we look forward to seeing you on the 10th. And all the best, and thank you for your wise and hopeful and insightful words. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I would like to introduce Mrs. Landau. Yeah, okay. We're having audio issues with Mrs. Landau, so we'll wait. So I'm going to start. I'm going to give a brief introduction to the summer program, and then we will have Rabbi Abadie. But is Mrs. Landau okay now?
Mute her.
Yes. Yes, Mr. Manson's
She doesn't have a camera. That's her speaking.
Okay. Shalom,
Aliza
Aliza.
and her
Anino, yata. סליחה, כי הייתה לי כזה של מצלמה, עכשיו אין לי.
Did
You
she
just
hear?
mute her, yeah?
Okay.
לא מופיע.
All right. Okay. So is somebody in touch with her?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Okay, so as Natan said, today, and I know that Rabbi Abadie will speak in more length about this, today is Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is a day of mourning for the Jewish people. And we try actually to start the Summer Institute on this day. And in a sense, what we're trying to do, many of us deal with issues of anti-Semitism and Jewish identity in our academic work, but we do it mostly from a historical perspective or even a Jewish, a sociological perspective. And I think it's important to take sort of a moment and understand that there's different ways of perceiving reality. It's not just sort of the Western academic worldview that's relevant. There's many cultures in the world, and there's many systems of knowledge and many systems of wisdom that we should become, in my view, much more aware of and to engage with. So from a Jewish perspective, today is the fast of Tisha B'Av. It's a day of mourning, and from a Jewish worldview, we believe that this is the day where we commemorate the destruction of the first temple, the second temple, the Inquisition, the Holocaust and pogroms. It's a day of significant mourning. And this is why we try to create the Summer Institute, to begin it on this day. I think it's also important to understand from a Jewish perspective, there's 4 different types of exiles. We are in an exile. There is the Egyptian exile, which represents slavery. There was the Babylonian exile that represented physical destruction, or what we would call in contemporary times genocide. And then there was the Greek exile, where the Greeks allowed the Jews to live in Israel on the condition that they could not worship their God and that they'd be assimilated into Greek culture. And today, from a Jewish perspective, or a perspective, it could be argued that we are in the exile of Edom, the exile of Rome, or the European exile. And it's written in the Torah that this exile will last deeper than the depths of the deepest sea, and will include the slavery of Egypt, it will include the physical annihilation of Babylon, it will include assimilation. And if you look at the history of Jews in exile in the European context, we can see that these 3 types of non-acceptance and brutality has followed Jewish history in the last 2,000 years. So it's important to understand things from a Jewish perspective and to understand our notion of freedom and exile. There's the great Jewish philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, and Levinas argued that unlike Christian notions of tolerance, from a Jewish perspective, we believe that all people are created in the image of God, that we all have a truth within us, even though we're different, And that to become wise, to learn, to grow as a person, you need to understand the truths of the other. So unlike tolerance, where we sometimes begrudgingly accept people who are different than us, from a Jewish ethical perspective that Emmanuel Levinas brought sort of the Torah, Talmudic traditions into the university, from a Jewish perspective, it's not a question of tolerance, it's a question that we need the other to be human. So Emmanuel Levinas famously said that the moment we see our face in the face of the other, that's the instant that we're human. That we need the other to be human. So it's very different than notions of tolerance. So there's a notion of humility and respect that not only that we afford the other, but we need to do it for us to be human, for us to gain wisdom. So these are some of the issues that I think we should begin to also think about, that there's other ways of seeing the realities that we grapple with, and Judaism and other cultures and religions and parts of the world, that there's deep, deep wisdom in different systems of knowledge that we ought to at least become familiar with and not just judge people kind of on ethnic or racial or whatever national categories that we tend to do, that there's things that are deep. And I'll also say very briefly, and it'll come up in the conversations, that I've spent time recently in parts of West Africa and East Africa, and we all know, and I'll introduce my team, that we have a member of the Israeli-Ethiopian community who's here, who's one of our directors. But in the last few years, I spent time in Ghana and Nigeria finding or meeting with Jewish communities that trace their ancestry to Israel and to the destruction of the temple. And their history is that they've been in parts of Africa for 15 years. I spent Passover in Nigeria with the Igbo people, and it was incredible. I mean, from my perspective, I'm not a rabbi, I'm not a halakhic scholar, but the traditions were definitely, in my view, profoundly Jewish. In their tradition, the Igbo people, which numbers millions, about 10 million people in Nigeria, they, in the tribes of Israel, the tribe of Ephraim in Hebrew, we say Bet Ephraim, the house of Ephraim. If people know about the history of Nigeria, there was the war with Biafra. And in Igbo, Biafra is Bet Ephraim. There's so many connections. And I think in a sense, if we're open to understanding that in the age of the internet and the age of communication, that peoples and communities are communicating with each other in ways that perhaps we never did, and communities are reconnecting with each other perhaps for the first time in many, many centuries. And it's fascinating. And I'll just say on that note, the sort of the reemergence of Jewish civilization in parts of Africa, South America, the Middle East, Asia, is exciting and astounding. So it's important to see things from a different perspectives in a way. So before I go on and introduce Rabbi Abadie, I would like to introduce our team to you. And when the lectures are over, I also want to hear from you. So the first person I'm going to call upon, and I know you've been dealing with our team I know you've been dealing with our team for a while. I'd like to introduce Daphne, if she could introduce herself to you.
Hello everyone, many familiar faces. My name is Daphne Kleiman. I'm sure I've communicated with all of you at some point. I do research and programming at ISGAP. I joined in March 2020, and ISGAP helped me through my master's degree, and now I'm here helping all of you guys with your education and hopefully with amazing curriculum development. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. And El Shaddai?
She'll be back.
She's outside. Okay, Rami. Rami Aziz is the director of our Middle East affairs.
Hello, I'm Rami Aziz. I'm Egyptian, but recently I moved into Canada. I joined the ISGAP as a student at ISGAP Summer School in 2017. And after I got my PhD, I joined ISGAP for research fellow. Recently, I wanted to be a director for this program. I'm working closely to spread this gap message to those in this country. And today we have a special guest. We have Rabbi Elie Abadie. He's the chief rabbi of the United Arab Emirates. During our who attend Cambridge conference, we had special distinguished speakers from the United Arab Emirates, Mohammed and Ali from Tehran, and they will join us after 2 days in our major event. So I'm here working to do my best to deliver ISGAP message through Middle East, and I'm honored and it's a privilege to be here with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we also have Fantahun Natan Asafa Dawit, who is the Director of African Affairs at ISGAP.
Thank you. Hello everybody. Welcome. It's good to see you all. My name is Fantahun Asafa Dawit. I'm originally from Ethiopia, an Ethiopian Jew. Left Ethiopia in 1986 to Montreal, Canada. That's where I met first Charles. He absorbed me as an immigrant to Canada, and ever since then we became not only friends but like brothers, including his parents, who were foster parents for me. Ever since then we became friends. In 1994 I made Aliyah. I immigrated to Israel, studied at the Technion, and recently I officially joined ISGAP. I say officially because ever since Charles established ISGAP, I've been learning and knowing what he's doing. But today I'm officially part of the ISGAP team. I'm the director of the African Affairs, and I'll be willing and wishing and hoping to be working with you all in order to promote this very crucial and sacred idea of ISGAP, to not only, ISGAP is not dealing only about anti-Semitism, but it's all about Holocaust denial, genocide denial, anti-Semitism, and all of that. So that's why we are now in the process of establishing a center for anti-Holocaust denial and genocide denial in one of the important African countries in Rwanda. Hopefully it will be successful and will be leading ISGAP into Africa and other nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next, El Shaddai Abraham, who's,
Hi.
I'm sure you all know her.
I think I've communicated with most of the folks here. El Shaddai Abraham. I joined ISGAP about almost 2 years ago now. I work on all things programming and publishing, so I help to put together the seminars, online courses, and a lot of other ISGAP activities. That's pretty much. That's everything.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. And Chelsea Wasserman, is a researcher.
Sorry, I have to back up my chair to stand up. Hi everyone. For those of you I haven't yet met, my name is Chelsea Wasserman, and I joined ISGAP in the spring. So I'm a little bit newer here, but I'm excited to take part of this program with all of you. I've been working alongside Charles as a policy and research associate. So currently we're doing a lot of research about anti-Semitism on campus. I have my own experiences with anti-Semitism on campus, which kind of brought me into this space. I'm excited to be here. So.
Thank you. And last but not least, the managing director of ISGAP, Harris Rafiq.
Good afternoon, everybody, and as the only Brit in attendance from ISGAP, from the ISGAP team, alongside Will, welcome to Oxford. It's an honour and privilege for me to be my first year here as an ISGAP employee. My background really is I come from being the chief exec of the world's first counter-extremism, counter-terrorism think tank, Quilliam Foundation. I was CEO for about 7 years. With offices in London, New York, DC, LA, Canada and other places. Charles and I first met in 2009 in Jerusalem, and where I spoke about these issues, and we've been trying to work together for a while. About 10 months ago, Charles asked me if I would be interested in working with ISGAP, and I said of course. So here I am. And I'll be lecturing on the triple threat and various other things. So, if you want to talk about all things Islam, I also hold, from an educational perspective, other than my masters I hold Rabbi will know ijazas in fiqh, Shafi, Hanafi, Tasawwuf and various things. So if you want to talk Islam and anti-Semitism, various other things, please do. You want to talk counter-terrorism, counter-extremism, please do. And I'm sure we're going to have a great 2 weeks.
Thank you. So the team, first of all, I'm very fortunate and lucky to be working with an amazing group of people. And the summer program, the conferences, our digital research center, all the work that goes into what we do, without this team, it would be completely impossible. It's not just a cliche, but true. And you'll see in your interaction with the team that they'll be personable and helpful, and you'll speak to any of us anytime if you have questions of scholarship, questions about Oxford. Feel free, we're here to help. So thank you. Chloe Pinto just came in. Chloe, introduce yourself. You're part of the ISGAP team.
Away from the mic?
No, just not it behind it.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Chloe Pinto. I'm a postgrad research fellow with the Wolf Institute and with ISGAP, and just finished my PhD at Cambridge, so great to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us.
And I also want to introduce you to the Wills, as we call them. We're all pictures. They've been doing our films for about 6 or 7 years now, and they're part of the ISGAP families, and they're very hospitable as well, so they'll be around. So Will Littlewood and Will Dawson. Cool. All right. So now I can introduce Mrs. Landau.
Yes. Yes.
Rafi,
Rafi
Mrs.
just-
Landau.
No, Landau speak on her own.
Aliza, okay. Shalom, Aliza. Okay. So I think this is going to be a very special introduction to our Summer Institute, and we're very fortunate to have Aliza Landau with us. And I think when we look at anti-Semitism and the impact of anti-Semitism, to have Mrs. Landau with us is really of tremendous importance, and it's a privilege. Mrs. Landau, Aliza, was born in 1938 in Lodz, Poland. Her family, her parents, Melech and Ruth Goldman, and brother Rishik, resided in Ruda Publika, a suburb of the city. After the Germans entered Poland, her parents decided that Aliza's father would go into hiding. Aliza, her mother, and brother were sent to the Lodz ghetto, but were able to escape and join the father shortly thereafterwards. This marked the beginning of a 4-year odyssey of wandering around Poland for the family, hiding in different locations, assisted by Polish peasants. The family was almost caught several times, and at one point was forced to escape to a nearby forest. After several days without food, her mother left the forest to search for some subsistence, but never returned. Aliza's brother died of starvation, and her father was found by the German patrol. They were taken together with several other people in a makeshift killing pit. Her father was killed, but Aliza survived unharmed. She waited for the nightmare to come to an end and literally crawled out of the pit of murdered Jewish people and escaped to a nearby village. She was only 6 years old. In the village, she was taken in by a Ukrainian couple who took care of her until the region was liberated. Her mother, who had survived in hiding after being severely injured, was able to find her after the war. They moved to Israel in 1948. Aliza married Yossi Landau and had 3 children. She worked as a kindergarten teacher, and today she lectures on the subject of the Holocaust and accompanies the Israeli police and security force delegations as well as high school students to Poland. So Aliza Landau, thank you for being here with us, and it's really a privilege that you're here, and the floor is yours.
Aliza, we can't hear you.
We can't hear
She's
her.
muted. Aliza, you're muted. Okay. Should be okay?
She's not on.
No?
She doesn't have audio connection.
Let me call. Can you call her son?
Aliza, we're gonna call you on the phone. We don't hear you. The audio is not connected.
It was working before.
Yeah. Okay, maybe now?
Okay now?
Yes, so. Okay, thank you.
Okay. My early years, as you understood, I was hidden in different places. I don't remember much, but I have a memory when I had the 3 years birthday. The person that had us came to feed us at night. We ate once a day by night. So he came to bring us something to eat, but he told us, I want you to come out from the hidden place outside to have some fresh air. And we went outside, and my father sang to me a birthday song, and the peasant asked him, who has birthday today? And my father said to him, our daughter is 3 years old. He went to his house, back to his house. He came back after a few minutes with a nice dish and a nice cloth on the dish. And I was a kindergarten teacher for many years. And this is the story I told to my children in the kindergarten before the Holocaust Day. And I told them that on the dish was lying a birthday cake. The children were very excited. Was there chocolate? Was there sweets? What was written on the cake? How many candles did you have? They knew very good how a birthday cake is to look. And I told them it was a piece of bread, from a big loaf of bread, a round one, that the peasants did it themselves in their kitchen. And it was also like it was thick, like 4 or 5 pieces of bread. The children were laughing horribly. They said, bread is not a cake is not bread, you don't understand anything. And I told them, you know, children, I had cake like you said to me now. I had them during years. But then I was so hungry, and to get a piece of bread that big, it was for me a real birthday cake. 2 days after, one of the children came to me and they told me, now I understand why you are not letting us to throw away the sandwich that our mother gave us in the morning to eat in the kindergarten. Just take it and throw it away to garbage. And if one child understood this, I'm very happy. Another memory from the war that I have, I was hidden in a pile of straw in a big field with many piles with straw. And the German took some big forks from the peasant, and they were looking into the piles. because if I cry, the German can find me and my family, because the farmer told us if they find one of you, they will find everyone, because they will turn down all the piles of the straw in the field. That's how I lived my early childhood. And when I at last got to Israel, Israel didn't exist yet. The British were here, and I came here and I said to myself, I think I'm reborn. And if I'm reborn, I need a new name, a Hebrew name. And my name was Gisela, so somebody saw that the letters are similar, and that's how I got my name when I was reborn. I built a family after the war. I have 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and I know that the Germans didn't want me to live, but I am alive. They didn't want me to build a family, but I have one. They didn't want me to have children. I have 3 of them. They didn't, of course, they didn't want me to have grandchildren, and I have 7. And this is my victory against the Nazis.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Aliza, would you like to take some questions? You have time to take a couple of questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Would anybody like to ask a question? I'll ask you one question while people are being polite and thinking. I remember last year, Aliza, you were talking about how the Jewish people were murdered during the Holocaust for not being white. And today, people are looking at Israel as sort of a racist country. What do you think of contemporary anti-Semitism? What's your view?
I don't think that the people that suffer from anti-Semitism and live today in Israel, they have something against black people that came from Africa, because I can't even think about racism that I will be a racist against another person. But you know, we have a very big picture here in Israel. People came from different places to Israel, and we have to learn. We have to learn to accept every person as he is, and we have what to learn. Today in the schools, in the kindergartens, the children are all together, and I believe that in a generation or 2 there won't be a racism. I can't think about Judaism and racism in the same thought. So I hope we will come over this problem.
Okay, thank you. So, Romy.
Well, I can ask you.
Okay. Or you could come and sit.
Hi Aliza, it's really a huge honor to listen to your story. I just wanted to ask you what your thoughts are on the Polish law about, making it a crime to implicate Poland in the Holocaust and that. and your experience of going back to Poland, because I see said that you sometimes take tours and that back to Poland.
I don't hear you very well.
Sorry.
So, please.
I wanted to
Yes.
ask about what you think of Poland making it a crime to implicate them in the Holocaust, their role.
Yeah. I think that Poland climb a very high tree and they don't know how to get down. They would like to feel completely clean about what happened in the Holocaust, and they said they were also a victim. That's right, they were a victim. But a lot of Poles gave away Jews. I can't judge them because I understand that maybe they were afraid and they wanted to keep their life, but a lot of Jews lost their lives because somebody was told that they are hidden in a place or something like this. There were more than 7,000 people that recognized, like, I don't know how you to say in English, Hasidei Umot Haolam. From Poland alone, there were 8,000 around the world. From Poland alone, 7,000. But 7,000 from 40 million, it's a very, very, very small amount. And if there, I was saved by Polish people. I can't say a word against. And they risked their life when they helped me. But Poland want to be so clean that, but we know what happened after the war, in Kielce, in Jedwabne, in places that you can't imagine such things. So I think if they would do what Germany did after the war, that say, we are guilty, we did this, but we want to come back to the human population, it would be much better for them, like now, than the fight against the history, against what everyone knows, because if you learned about the time, we can't forget it. The Jews won't forget what happened. And I don't think that they behave with wisdom.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? No? Okay. So, Mrs. Landau, on behalf of everybody here, thank you very much, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and continued strength. You're doing very important work to educate people, so thank you very much for taking the time. Thank you.
To study about antisemitism.
Thank you. Mazel tov. Toda rabba. So, Rabbi, you want to come up in the front? Good, thank you. Okay, so we have our keynote speaker here with us this evening. Rabbi Abadie is joined the Jewish Council of the Emirates in 2020 as a senior residential rabbi. As the Jewish community in the United Arab Emirates experiences significant growth, from the influx of Jewish tourists and business people from Israel and other Western countries. From Israel and other Western countries. This is based on, or in the aftermath of the historic signing of the Abraham Accords. Rabbi Dr. Abadie provides spiritual leadership for the local community, helping to build and grow Jewish life in the Gulf. The rabbi joined the JCE with a vision to create a critical Jewish infrastructure and local community, including a day school, a mikvah, it's a ritual bath, a bet din, which is like a Jewish court, and the Arabian Kosher Certification Agency. And I'll just say on a personal note, I recently met Dr. Abadie in Abu Dhabi with my friend and colleague Harris. And I'll just tell you a quick story, I think you heard it, which is interesting. Any Jew who goes to a synagogue for Shabbat in the United States of America, in cities and rural areas in Canada and Western countries, if you show up unannounced, the odds are very high that you'll have somebody in security checking out who you are, verifying who you are, because of the threat of anti-Semitism. Radical right-wing anti-Semitism in the United States and radical Islamists and others, radical leftists, are really physically violent threats to the Jewish community. And this was not the way I was raised in Montreal. Synagogues were kind of open. And the world has changed, unfortunately, in the last several years in a dramatic way. Harris and I went for Shabbat to Dr. Rabbi Abadie's home in Abu Dhabi, and we were a little late. So I knocked on, it's a courtyard, there's a gate like many of the houses in the community, in the neighborhood, and I knocked on the gate to the house. There was no answer. On Shabbat, you're not supposed to use electricity, the telephone, so can't ring the doorbell. So I knocked. After a few minutes, I kind of slowly opened the door and looked in the courtyard. Nobody was there. So I entered the courtyard. I went up to the front door of the house and knocked gently on the door. There was no answer. Can't ring the doorbell because it's Shabbat. And after a few minutes, I had the courage and I opened the door. And I walked into your living room where everybody was davening, praying for the Shabbat. And there was no security. The doors were open. So it's interesting. In the Gulf, I hope this continues, and I hope it wasn't some, off-chance experience, but it's amazing what's happening to the Jewish community in the region, led by Rabbi Abadie. And it's also equally kind of tragic and amazing what's happening in Western democratic countries that practice democracy and preach certain notions of citizenship, where increasingly Jewish communities are literally under physically violent threats. So on that note, and as Tisha B'Av, the fast, commemorate the destruction of the temple and the catastrophes of the Jewish community, I guess it's an appropriate way to open our session this evening. So thank you for the honor. Yeah. Thank you for the honor of being here with us.
Thank you, Dr. Small. It's a real pleasure and honor for me to be here with you this evening and hopefully the next several days. Again, on this day of Tisha B'Av, of the 9th of Av, I made sure to dress the part and wearing my special non-leather shoes that we are instructed to do so. So again, with our dear friend, Honorable Chairman Natan Sharansky, my very dear friend, Your Excellency Dr. Ali Al-Noemi, Professor Boaz Ganor, Mrs. Landau, and esteemed guests and participants. We recite every year in the Pesach Seder, V'hisha'amda la'avotenu velanu, and it is God's promise that has stood for our ancestors and for us, since it's not only one person or nation that has stood against us to destroy us, but rather in every generation they stand against us to destroy us. That the Holy One, blessed be He, rescues us from their hand. We Jews have learned that in every generation there will be someone a person, a nation, or even many nations that will stand against us to destroy us. We have to be prepared with prayers, with diplomacy, and also to defend ourselves in any way possible. Anti-Semitism, sometimes called history's oldest hatred, is hostility or prejudice against Jewish people, which you all know that. The Nazi Holocaust is history's most extreme example of anti-Semitism, followed by probably the Inquisition and forced conversions. However, anti-Semitism did not begin with Adolf Hitler, Ymach Shemo. It reached its peak, or so we hope. Anti-Semitic attitudes date back to ancient times. In much of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, Jewish people were denied citizenships and forced to live in ghettos as second-class citizens and as dhimmis. Anti-Jewish riots swept the Russian Empire during the 19th and early 20th century, and anti-Semitic incidents have increased in part of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa in the last several years. The term anti-Semitism, as you all know, was first coined in 1879 by the German anti-Jewish writer and journalist Wilhelm Marr, who founded the League of Anti-Semites in Germany to describe hatred or hostility towards Jews. The term was to refer specifically to scientific rather than religious opposition to Jews. His use of the term anti-Semitism is not to decry it, but it is to promulgate it. The history of anti-Semitism, however, goes back much further. Hostility against Jews may date back nearly as far as Jewish history. In the ancient empires of Babylonia, Greece, and Rome, Jews who originated in the ancient kingdom of Judea were often criticized and persecuted for their efforts to remain a separate cultural group rather than taking on the religious and social customs of their conquerors. Anti-Semitism may go back even further than that, to the times of the Bible and the early post-biblical period. There were many aggressions throughout the Bible and post-biblical times against the Israelites, where they used to be, and later on, the remnants of the Israelites, which became the Jews, the descendants of the tribe of Judah, and then with them the remnants of the Levites and the Kohanim, the priestly families that were living amongst them. Which aggressions or wars or incidents would be considered anti-Semitic, and which would be considered power struggle or cultural struggle or expansion of an empire? We would need to know and understand the many definitions of anti-Semitism throughout the ages to be able to categorize or define those aggressions against the Israelites and the Jews as anti-Semitic. Of course, the latest and most contemporary and updated definition of anti-Semitism is the IRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which has been now very widely spread and adopted by many countries and organizations, including at Cambridge. However, would it apply as a definition of anti-Semitism during biblical and post-biblical times? Let us briefly review the IRA definition and its addenda paragraphs. Anti-Semitism, and I quote, is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. Now the further small paragraphs. Anti-Semitism frequently charges Jews with conspiring to harm humanity, and it is often used to blame Jews for why things go wrong. It is expressed in speech, writing, visual form, and actions, and employs sinister stereotypes and negative character traits. Calling for aiding or justifying the killing or harming of Jews in the name of a radical ideology or an extremist view of religion, making mendacious, dehumanizing, demonizing, or stereotypical allegations about Jews as such or the power of Jews as collective, such as the myth about a world Jewish conspiracy or the Jews controlling the media, economy, government, or the societal institutions, accusing Jews as people of being responsible for real or imagined wrongdoing committed by a single Jew or group of Jews, or even for acts committed by non-Jews. denying the fact, scope, mechanism, or intentionality of the genocide of the Jewish people at the hands of the Nazis and their supporters and accomplices during World War II. That's also anti-Semitism. Accusing the Jews as a people or Israel as a state of inventing or exaggerating the Holocaust. Accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or to the alleged priorities of Jews worldwide than to the interests of their own nations. Denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination by claiming that the existence of the State of Israel is a racist endeavor. Applying double standards by requiring of it a behavior not expected of any other nation or even demanded of any other democratic nation. Using the symbols or images associated with classic anti-Semitism, claims of Jews having killed Jesus or blood libel to characterize Israel or Israelis, drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis, and lastly, holding Jews collectively responsible for actions of the State of Israel. There are a few other more recent definitions actually of anti-Semitism that are not as comprehensive as the IRA. We have, for example, the Independent Jewish Voice of Canada in 2020. We have the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism released in March 2021. And then we have the Annenberg School of Communications and Journalism also released in March 2021. I will not go through that. However, there are also earlier definitions of anti-Semitism. We have in the Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines anti-Semitism as plain hostility towards or discrimination against Jews as a religious, ethnic, or racial group. We have the Britannica Dictionary, only 4 words, hatred of Jewish people. We have then the Oxford Dictionary published in 2011 that anti-Semitism is hatred of and hostility toward the Jews at times, including the belief that they pose a threat to society and should be eliminated. It is generally applied to all manifestation of hatred of the Jewish people. Over its long history, it has taken different forms in different cultural contexts. There's a whole book, The Definition of Anti-Semitism, again, which I'm sure many of you know about and have read, was published in 2015 by Kenneth Marcus, an American attorney and a former Assistant Secretary of Education for Civil Rights of the United States. To summarize the pre-IRA definitions of anti-Semitism in one sentence, it is the hatred, discrimination, prejudice, and hostility towards Jews, simple and concise. The late Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, of blessed memory, in his keynote address in the European Parliament on 27th of September 2016, called anti-Semitism the mutating virus, because it takes different forms, but it remains the same thing. In the Middle Ages, Jews were hated because of their religion, what we might define as religious anti-Semitism. Briefly, what's religious anti-Semitism? Originated and instigated by early Christian church and propagated by Christian subjects and Christian kings throughout Europe. Although Jesus and his disciples were practicing Jews and Christianity is rooted in the Jewish teaching of monotheism, Judaism and Christianity became rivals soon after Jesus was crucified by Pontius Pilate, who executed him according to the contemporary Roman practice of justice at that time. Religious rivalry initially was theological. It soon also became political. Historians agree that the break between Judaism and Christianity followed the Roman destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem in the year 68 or 70, according to different counts. In the aftermath of this devastating defeat, which was interpreted by Christians as a sign of divine punishment, the Gospels diminished Roman responsibility and expressed Jewish culpability in the death of Jesus, both explicitly in Matthew chapter 27 and implicitly. Jews were depicted as killers of the Son of God. Christianity was intent on replacing Judaism by making its own particular message universal. The New Testament was seen as fulfilling the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. Christians claiming to be the new Israel, both in flesh and in spirit. Some early Christian fathers taught that God had finished with the Jews, whose only purpose in history was to prepare for the arrival of his son. According to this view, the Jews should have left the scene. Their continued survival seemed to be an act of stubborn defiance. Exile was taken as a sign of divine disfavor incurred by the Jews' denial that Jesus was the Messiah and by their alleged role in his crucifixion. As Christianity spread in the first century of the Common Era, most Jews continued to reject Christianity. As a consequence, by the 4th century, Christians tended to regard Jews as an alien people who, because of their repudiation of Christ and his church, were condemned to perpetual migration. When the Christian church overtook the Roman Empire, its leaders inspired many Roman laws designed to segregate Jews and curtail their freedom. As a consequence, Jews were increasingly forced to the margins of European society. Moving on now a little bit more to modern times in the 19th and early 20th century. Jews were hated now because of their race, what we might define as racial anti-Semitism. Racial anti-Semitism is prejudice against Jews based on a belief that Jews constitute a distinct race that has inherent traits or characteristics that appear in some way abhorrent or inherently inferior or otherwise different from the traits or characteristics of the rest of society. Now, the rise of eugenics, scientific racism, the ideology that genetics played a role in group behavior and characteristic made it possible for anti-Semites to clothe their hatred of Jews in scientific theory. The Nazis extended the logic of racial anti-Semitism, enshrining racial anti-Semitic idea into laws which assess the blood or ethnicity of people and prescribing purely on that basis the subsequent fate of those so assessed. Nazis regarded Jews not only as members of a subhuman race, but as a dangerous cancer that would destroy the German people. A Nazi ideology that perceived Jewishness to be biological, the elimination of Jews was essential to the purification and even the salvation of the German people. Racial anti-Semitism has existed alongside religious anti-Semitism since at least the Middle Ages, if not longer. In Spain, for example, even before the Edict of Expulsion, 1492, which we just commemorated on August 3rd, Spanish Jews who converted to Catholicism were known as conversos, and their descendants were called New Christians. They were frequently accused of lapsing back to their former religious practices. To isolate conversos, the Spanish nobility developed an ideology called the cleanliness of blood, pureza de sangre. Then there is what is defined as economic anti-Semitism, which I see as a derivative of either religious or anti-Semitism or racial anti-Semitism, or both. Economic anti-Semitism uses stereotypes and canards that are based on negative perception or assertions of the economic status, occupation, or economic behavior of Jews. Jews have been seen as either paupers or savages or as conspirators, leaders of a financial cabal seeking global domination. Stereotypes of Jews as being connected to greed, money lending, such as the canard that Jews control the world finances, myths as Jews control the banks, the money supply, the economy, and businesses of the community or of the country or even of the world. Moving on now to our more contemporary world today, for example, we still see remnants of all those types of anti-Semitism. However, now Jews are hated because of their nation state, the state of Israel, which we might define, I will define as anti-Zion anti-Semitism. The founders of Zionism and the leaders of the state of Israel, and that was the solution of Theodor Herzl originally, had presumed that the normalization of the Jewish condition, that is achieving statehood with its flag and an army, and emptying Europe of Jews would seriously diminish anti-Semitism. However, the existence of the Israeli state seemed to have the opposite effect, unfortunately, fueling rather than quenching the long-standing fires of anti-Semitic hatred. When Israel, the only fully functioning democracy in the Middle East with a free press and independent judiciary, is regularly accused of the 5 cardinal sins against human rights, namely racism, apartheid, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and attempted genocide, that is anti-Zion, anti-Semitism. When Israel is the only of the 193 member nations of the United Nations that has its right to exist regularly challenged, with one country and many others, groups of countries committed to its destruction, that is anti-Zion, anti-Semitism. Now, criticizing Israel is not anti-Semitism, we all know. Criticizing the policies of the Israeli government is legitimate. It's not anti-Semitism, as we criticize the policies of the UK, of the EU, of the US, and many other countries. However, when a boundary is crossed, it becomes anti-Semitism. In 2004, our own chairman, Natan Sharansky, then he was the minister, suggested 3 markers to delineate the boundary between legitimate criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism. Under his 3D scheme, when one of these elements was detectable, the line has been crossed. First one is double standards, judging Israel by one standard and all other countries by another. The second D is delegitimization, the conclusion that Israel has no right to exist. The third D, demonization of the Jews and the Israeli state, not merely as wrong-headed or mistaken, but as a demonic force in the contemporary world. Now, any of those boundaries crossed, even one of them, makes anti-Zionism an anti-Semitic act. The last type I would define as inherent or inborn anti-Semitism. The hatred, discrimination, prejudice, and hostility towards Jews simply because they are Jews. Now, no real reason exists. You may find countries or in countries that there are no Jews, nor they know what a Jew is, some degrees of anti-Semitism. Could it be that nursing children are nursed and taught to be anti-Semitic, to hate the Jews just because they are Jews? And later on in life, they will find a reason to hate Jews and they will justify it. Now, I've spent longer than I wanted trying to define anti-Semitism to all of you, which probably know better than I do. But also in the different hats that it rears, I have done it only to help understand if anti-Israelite or anti-Jewish elements in the biblical and post-biblical era are to be considered anti-Semitic or not. So it was a refresher. Let us see now selected example of the biblical period if they fit any of the definition of anti-Semitism. My first example is our patriarch Isaac, Yitzhak, and Avimelech, the king of Gerar. Isaac went to live in Gerar, and he did very well in business, as the Bible recounts in Genesis chapter 26, verses 12 to 16. I'll read a few of those verses. Isaac sowed in that land and reaped 100-fold the same year. God blessed him. And the man grew richer and richer until he was very wealthy. He acquired flocks and herds and a large household, so that the Philistines were jealous of him. And the Philistines stopped up all the wells which his father's servant had dug in the days of his father Abraham, filling them with earth. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you have become far too bigger and stronger than us." So Isaac departed from there to Beersheba. After a while, Abimelech, accompanied by Phicol, his army chief, went to see Isaac in Beersheba. Isaac said to them, "Why have you come to me, seeing that you have been hostile to me and hated me and have driven me away from you?" In my opinion, this is the first anti-Semitic incident in the Bible, as we see the use of some actions like jealousy, sabotage of the property and of the wealth of Abraham, and then we see key words. When Isaac was expelled from Gerar, the words used by Abimelech were, "You have become bigger and stronger than us." These are cliché words for accusing Jews for financial control and global domination. To me, that's a clear example of economic anti-Semitism. The second example is when the wife of Potiphar, who was the courtier of Pharaoh, attempted to seduce Joseph when Joseph was Potiphar's butler, she accused Joseph, as we read in Genesis chapter 39, verse 17. She said to her husband, when her husband was questioning her, she said, "The Hebrew slave whom you brought into our house came to me to play with me." Her use of the term Hebrew slave connotes a discriminatory and a racist term. Now, this derogatory term of Hebrew by the Egyptians is more acutely seen when the brothers of Joseph came down to Egypt before Joseph revealed himself to them, and when Joseph by then was the viceroy of Egypt, a few years after the first incident. He invited them to eat by his palace. They set 3 tables, one for him, one for the brothers, and one for the Egyptians. Genesis 43, verse 32, states the reason why 3 tables. And I quote, "They served him by himself and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, for the Egyptians could not dine with the Hebrews, since that would be abhorrent to the Egyptians." The Hiskuni, a 13th century commentator, explains that for it was something detestable or abhorrent for Egyptians. He explains that Egyptians detested eating at the same table as the Hebrews, as the Egyptians felt that they were a superior race and everyone else was inferior. Again, a clear-cut reference to racial anti-Semitism. So we have established that we talk about ancient Egyptians practice racial anti-Semitism to a point. Now we will see how other types of anti-Semitism was also expressed. And that's my third example. More than a century may have passed from that story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife or his brothers. The Israelites settled in ancient Egypt and became a large distinct ethnic group. Pharaoh, feeling threatened by what historians refer to as the possible Hyksos or other foreign people who might have designed to conquer Egypt, he turns his attentions to the Hebrews, and now, for the first time, he calls them the nations of the children of Israel, as we read in Exodus chapter 1, verses 8 to 22. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph, and he said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and gain ascendancy over the country and get us up out of the land." So they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built garrison city for Pharaoh, Pithom, and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians ruthlessly enslaved the Israelites. They made life bitter for them with harsh labor and mortar and bricks, and with all sorts of tasks in the field as they ruthlessly enslaved them. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, "Every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, but let every girl live." We see clearly from here, from all these verses, a combination of economic anti-Semitism, use of canards and stereotypes of Jews conspiring to harm humanity, in this case ancient Egypt, calling for, aiding, and justifying the killing or harming of Jews, dehumanizing, demonizing, or stereotypical allegations about Jews or the power of Jews as collective, such as the myth about a world Jewish conspiracy, or of Jews controlling the media, economy, government, accusing Jewish citizens of being disloyal to their country and being loyal to the interests of other nations. In this case, the Egyptian slavery of the Israelites was not just an anti-Semitic sentiments, but sentiments that were followed by harsh and severe actions, which we can call as the first Holocaust indeed, where a systematic policy of discrimination, mistreatment, hard labor, and ultimately killing. The fourth example is the infamous story of Amalek, the one dubbed as the arch enemy of the Jewish people, the one who hated the Jews just for hate's sake. No reason given. The term Amalek we used throughout history to label an implacable enemy of the Jews. Haman or Haman in the story of Purim, the Spanish Inquisition, Russian pogroms, and Nazi Germany, we all call them Amalek. Was Amalek an anti-Semite? What kind of anti-Semitism did Amalek espouse or practiced? Amalek was the grandson of Esau, the brother of patriarch Jacob. Esau hated Jacob due to their sibling rivalry. Nothing is known about Amalek until suddenly and unexpectedly he attacked the Israelites on their way out of Egypt. Exodus chapter 17, verse 8 to 16. Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim, and Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword. Then God said to Moses, inscribe this in a document and as a reminder, and read it aloud to Joshua. I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. He said, a hand upon the throne of God, God will be at war with Amalek throughout the ages. What encouraged or led Amalek to attack the Israelites suddenly and unexpectedly? They were not attempting to conquer his land. In fact, we are told that they came from far away. What did the Israelites do to attract such ire of Amalek? That he hated them just to hate them. Amalek hatred was irrational. It was the hate that he might have nursed from his mother or learned from his grandfather. This is a clear example of inherent or inborn anti-Semitism. My fifth example in the Bible, as the Israelites were concluding their 40th sojourn, 40th year in the desert, and were close to enter the Holy Land, Balak, who usurped the kingship of Moab, the land of Moab, a land which the Israelites had no authorization nor intention to conquer. Yet Balak, in his disgust of the Israelites, contacts Balaam, a sorcerer, to curse the Israelites so he can vanquish them. In book of Numbers, chapter 22, verse 3 to 6. Moab was alarmed because that people, he calls them that people, the Israelites, were so numerous. Moab was disgusted by the Israelites. And Moab said to the elders of Midian, now this horde will lick clean all that is around us, as an ox licks up the grass in the field. Balak sent messengers to Balaam to invite him, saying, there is a people that came out of Egypt. It hides the earth from view, and it is settled next to me. Come then, put a curse upon this people for me, since they are too numerous for me. Perhaps I can thus defeat them and drive them out of the land. Now Balak had really no reason to hate the Israelites and to try to defeat them. As I mentioned above, they had no authorization nor intention to conquer his land whatsoever. They were just passing by his border. Balak's use of the words like disgusted by the Israelites, or calling them a horde that will lick clean all what's around us, and it hides the earth from view. In addition, some commentators explain that Balak, having usurped the power in Moab, had many enemies and wanted a distraction to find a scapegoat. Naturally, he chose the Israelites, as we see plenty even in our own days, as the Jews and Israel are used as scapegoats for many of those tyrants. Therefore, Balak practiced economic anti-Semitism, racial anti-Semitism, also using the same canards and stereotypes of demonizing the Jews as conspirators to destroy nations. My sixth example. Now, we would think that anti-Zion anti-Semitism is only a relatively new anti-Semitism, given the new establishment of the State of Israel. We will see from several episodes in the book of Judges, which I will not enumerate or delve into due to time constraints, the nations that surrounded the land of Israel, including the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Emirates, the Arameans, the Philistines, and many others, delegitimized, demonized, and treated the Israelite sovereignty over that land with double standards and many other things. A clear practice of anti-Zion anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews because they inhabit the land of Israel. And my last biblical example that I will bring is the story of Purim. the famous story when the Jews in exile in the Persian Empire, after being exiled by Babylonia, faced a clear and imminent danger of annihilation and extermination by Haman, the one that I mentioned as a descendant of Amalek. The viceroy, he was the viceroy of King Ahasuerus, known as King Xerxes in the 5th century before the Common Era. Mordechai, the Jew, who was a courtier to the king of Persia, an uncle of Queen Esther, the Jewish wife of King Xerxes, refused to bow to Haman, since Judaism prohibits bowing to any human and to anything except to God. Haman was incensed and furious at Mordechai. He convinces King Xerxes to allow him to annihilate and exterminate the Jews in his kingdom, the kingdom stretched from India to Ethiopia and to the borders of Greece. The entire Jewish people lived under his empire, meaning if the order to annihilate the Jews would have been fulfilled, the Jews would have ceased to exist since 2,500 years ago. The Holocaust occurred in Europe and part of the Middle East, but the Jews in America could have been saved, or would have been saved, if the Jews of Europe would not. But the Jews living under the Persian Empire, there was no place to escape or to be saved because they all lived in that same empire. Haman in the scroll of Esther is attributed to Amalek, as I said, the one that we mentioned before, the arch enemy of the Israelites. So we believe that Haman had an inherent and inborn anti-Semitism. He hated the Jews without reason. Let us see the words that he uses in the book of Esther, chapter 3, verse 5 and 6. When Haman saw that Mordechai would not kneel or bow low to him, Haman was filled with rage. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordechai alone, having been told whose Mordechai's people were. Haman plotted to annihilate all the Jews, Mordecai's people, throughout the kingdom of King Xerxes. Haman then said to King Xerxes, "There is certain people scattered and dispersed among the other peoples in all the provinces of your realm, whose religion is different from those of any other religion, any other people, and who do not follow the king's religion, and it's not in your majesty's interest to tolerate them." And the king said, "The money and the people are yours to do with as you see fit." And the last verse, it says, "Accordingly, written instructions were dispatched by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, massacre, and exterminate all the Jews, young and old, children and women, on a single day. On the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions." We see clearly by the verse saying Haman disdained to lay hands on Mordechai alone, having been told who Mordechai's people were. Haman plotted to annihilate all the Jews. That Haman had already preconceived prejudice and hatred towards the Jews. And once he heard that Mordechai was a Jew, and he said, "Why should I kill only Haman? I will kill everybody, all of his people." So being an Amalekite, Haman, he must have had an inborn and inherent anti-Semitic sentiment. And by Haman saying to the king, there is certain people scattered and dispersed among other people, that their religion is different, that they don't follow other people's religion, that they don't follow the king's religion, that's clear reference to racial anti-Semitism and religious anti-Semitism. Fortunately, Haman and his supporters did not succeed to exterminate the Jews. Their plan was turned upon them, and the Jews were saved. With this, I conclude the biblical anti-Semitic incidents and episodes. There are many more, I just selected those. Now, for the post-biblical ones, I will only mention two, again for the sake of brevity. So, post-biblical era. The first is the story of Hanukkah, the one that we celebrate around December with lighting the 8 candles. So, Hanukkah reveals an anti-Semitic sentiments and acts by the Greek Empire. The events that inspired the Hanukkah holiday took place during a particularly turbulent time and turbulent phase of Jewish history. Around the year 200 before the Common Era, in Judea, the land of Israel, came under the control of Antiochus III, the Seleucid king of Syria, who allowed the Jews to live there to continue practicing their religion. His son, however, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, proved less benevolent. He outlawed the Jewish religion and ordered the Jews to worship Greek gods. In the year 168 before the Common Era, his soldiers descended upon Jerusalem, massacring thousands of people and desecrating the city's second holy temple by erecting an altar to Zeus and sacrificing pigs within its sacred walls. There was a significant pressure also to Hellenize the Jews, forced acculturation and assimilation. Now, the Seleucid Greeks considered themselves a superior people and culture, imposing their culture and religion upon the Jews under penalty of death. Their belief in superiority makes them racial anti-Semites, not necessarily to the racial science or pseudoscience that did not exist then, and their actions of forced acculturation and religious assimilation makes them religious anti-Semites by imposing their belief that their faith is superior. And my second and last example of post-biblical anti-Semitism is the destruction of the first and second temple. Now, chronologically, the destruction of the first temple occurred during biblical times and before the story of Purim and Hanukkah that I mentioned. Therefore, it would not belong here. However, since we have a lot of similarities between the two destructions, and we're speaking about the destruction, I chose to discuss it at this juncture. Now, from the simple reading of the biblical account of the first temple destruction that took place in the year 586 before the Common Era, in the books of Kings and Jeremiah, we do not see clear anti-Semitic sentiment. We do not, as I said, from Nebuchadnezzar, the great king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. His desire was to expand his empire and subjugate the nations that he conquered if they would rebel against him. However, from the reading of the Book of Lamentations, which we read between yesterday and today twice, we see that although King Nebuchadnezzar II may not have been an anti-Semite himself, but the nations around, when seeing the kingdom of Judea destroyed, rejoiced due to their hatred of it. Again, hatred for no reason. Book of Lamentation, I will read a few of the verses so you could get an idea. The Israelite nation says, "There is none to comfort her. Of all her friends, all her allies have betrayed her. They have become her foes. When her people fell by enemy hands with none to help her, when enemies looked on and gloated over her downfall. When they heard how I was sighing, there was none to comfort me. All my foes heard of my plight and exulted. All who pass your way clap their hands at you. They hiss and wag their head. At fair Jerusalem, is this the city that was called perfect in beauty, joy of all the earth? All your enemies jeer at you. They hiss and gnash their teeth and scream, we have ruined her. Ah, this is the day we hoped for. We have lived to see it. I have become a laughingstock to all people, the butt of their jibes all day long. You have seen all their malice, all their designs against me. You have heard, O Lord, their taunts, all their designs against me, the mouthings and pratings of my adversaries against me all day long. See how at their leisure or at work I am the butt of their jibes." We see from these verses how the nations of the world rejoiced and did not give a helping hand to Judea. They whistled, they laughed, they prated and joked about the fate of Judea, things that we even see today by some nations and people, that they dance, sing, and give sweets when a tragedy happens to Israel and the Jewish people. This is anti-Semitism of all kinds. Now, regarding the Second Temple destruction by the Romans, there is a clearer evidence that anti-Semitism may have driven the events, or at least may have followed the events. We commemorate these events in the period of 3 weeks, which actually began 3 weeks ago, as Dr. Small mentioned, and will conclude tonight at nightfall. I'm sitting here having still fasting from last night, and I'm waiting for that nightfall time of 9:20 p.m. to be able to have something to eat and drink. So these 3 weeks mark the time and the events that lead to the destruction of the temple. The first day of the 3 weeks is the 17th day of Tammuz, of the month of Tammuz, the Hebrew month, and the last day is the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Ab, which really was yesterday, but since it was Saturday, it was postponed till today. So today we commemorate the 9th of Ab, when historically the first and the second temple were destroyed, but there was a period of 500 years in between them. Now several events occurred, not only during this period of 3 weeks, but for at least 3 years before that. Our sages in the Talmud, Tractate Ta'anit, enumerate several tragedies, 5 of each day. I'll mention only a few of them that are pertinent to our discussion. 5 occurred on the 17th of Tammuz, 5 occurred on the 9th of Ab. On the 17th of Tammuz, the walls of the city of Jerusalem were breached. Apostomus, a Roman general, burnt a Torah scroll, and he placed an idol erected in the sanctuary. On the 9th of Ab, the first and second temples were destroyed. The city of Beitar was captured, and the city of Jerusalem was plowed over. Now you may ask yourself, what does that have to do with a definition of anti-Semitism that we just read? Now, Torah scroll burning and placing an idol in the temple, these are the two of the greatest violations for Judaism as a monotheistic religion. That is certainly a religious anti-Semitism, when they try to completely violate the most sacred principles of the religion. Now, burning the city of Jerusalem and plowing it over, meaning destroying it to the ground, when Jerusalem was the seat and the capital of the kingdom of Israel, and later the kingdom of Judea for over 1,000 years. Then several years later, they captured and destroyed the city of Beitar, which at that time became the seat and symbol of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel after the destruction of Jerusalem, thereby erasing any Jewish self-government and sovereignty, is certainly a strong example of anti-Zion anti-Semitism, by denying the claim and sovereignty of the Jews over the land of Israel and Judea. Now, how did they deny that claim? I'm going into it. The Romans went further in their anti-Zion anti-Semitism to achieve their goal of eliminating any connection of the Jews to the land of Israel and Jerusalem. First, they renamed Jerusalem Aelia Capitolina. They removed the name Jerusalem. And they renamed the land of Israel as Palestina, a name that land never really had. The Romans revived a name that belonged to a people that came from the Mediterranean, Roman and Greek islands and settled in the land of Israel from the time of the patriarch Abraham. In Hebrew, their name is Pelishtim, from the word Palash. Palash in Hebrew means invaders. As they invaded the land from the sea, they did not belong to that area. As I said, they came from the Mediterranean islands. Now they lived in the southern part of the land of Israel from the time of Abraham until the time of King David. Then they disappeared, like many other groups that lived there, wars, famines, and many things. From the time of King David to the time of the Romans, naming the land as Palestina by the Romans was over 1,200 years later of the existence of any groups called Philistines. The Philistines did not exist for that many years. Yet the Romans, who may have been related to the Philistines, named the land of Israel Palestina, which is the Latin name of Philistines. Now, those acts by the Romans fit certainly very well in the IRA paragraph of anti-Semitism, in denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination and the right to exist as a nation state, and even more than that, by attempting to erase any connection or relation of the Jews to the land of Israel by revising history to suit their endeavors. Actions that I hope sound very, very familiar to people in this room, as we've seen in our own days in many attempts to revise history at the United Nations and in many international fora to deny any connections of the Jews to the land of Israel. That is certainly anti-Semitism. And I will conclude. And I thank you very much for your patience. over a half hour and so. I will conclude this presentation by quoting from an article, The Mystery of Hate, authored by Prime Minister Yair Lapid in 2013, long before he became Prime Minister. And I quote him, "Why do they hate us so much? Why do leaders, along with tens of thousands of their supporters, dedicate their life, their visible talents, their country's destiny, to fight a country and a people they have never ever even seen, people they have never met? Why do children in countries who cannot even locate Israel on the map burn its flag in the city center and offer to commit suicide for its elimination? Why do intellectuals agitate the innocent and helpless against peace agreements? Why are countries willing to stay as pathetic as depressed third world countries for the dubious right to finance terror organizations that will eventually threaten their own country's existence? Why do they hate us so? What have we done to them? How are we even relevant to their lives? What do they know about us? Why do they hate us so much in faraway countries? They don't have anything to eat there, yet they hate us. Where do they get the energy to hate? It is something that we do. 2,000 years of anti-Semitism taught us in the most painful way possible that there is something about us that irritates the world. So we did the thing everyone wanted. We got up and left. We have established our own tiny little country where we can irritate ourselves without interrupting the others. And we do. We do plenty. However, the hatred continues as if no other destiny is possible. Active hatred, poisoned, unstoppable. I refuse to accept the argument that claims that is just the way they are. They said it about us so many times that we have learned to accept this expression. What about their thoughts? What about their hopes, loves, ambitions, and their dreams? What about their children? When they send their children to die, does it seem enough for them to say that it was all worthwhile just because they hate us so much? And I conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The first comment I'd like to say is I hope we can publish it. It was amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. So we have some time for Q&A. And Noah.
Thank you. From here?
Yeah, stand up so I guess everybody can hear you, but yeah.
Hi.
Thank you.
Hello. And thank you very much, first of all, for this talk. It was very inspiring and interesting, and I learned a lot. I have two questions for you, please. You talked a bit about you talked about the definitions of different definitions of anti-Semitism and about religious anti-Semitism. And I wanted to ask you, pardon my German, but what do you think about Aufklärung, Antisemitismus, or like perhaps, I don't know if you can call it secularizing anti-Semitism that would be then, I don't know, going with the premise of, well, Jews are primitive or gruesome for their traditions, for sticking with religious practices. And then I'll ask the second question.
So, can you repeat that question again?
Yes. What do you think about the type of religious anti-Semitism that might be called Aufklärungsantisemitismus? Are you familiar with the term?
No.
This would be kind of, I don't know if you can translate it into like secularized anti-Semitism, more kind of the opposite idea of the Jews for sticking to religion, for being, for sticking to their tradition, are primitive, gruesome, they're not part of our progress, kind of Western secularized atheist world.
Right. So that is definitely a relatively new type of anti-Semitism that we see that is springing all over Europe, especially when it comes to outlawing slaughter and outlawing the circumcision. That is definitely a secularized anti-Semitism in which unfortunately the secular forces, it's in a religion by itself. And we have seen in the United States, secular people to such degree, secularism become a religion in itself. And so it is still a religious anti-Semitism, even though it's a secular religious anti-Semitism. But again, I'm not surprised, because if you really look at science, when it speaks about slaughter and about circumcision, science is completely on the side of the Jewish tradition of slaughter and of circumcision. And yet somehow the secular world, because they are anti-Semite, they always will try to bring certain ideas that claim that it's cruelty to animals, that the mutilation of a child, and yet science is completely on our side. And yet you will have pseudoscience, those same secular either professors or pseudoscientists who, because of their anti-Semitism, they're going to come up with a theory, with hypotheses to prove that it is primitive and it is barbaric.
Thank you. Oh, just a moment, please.
You have a second question, yes.
Well, just a moment. Yeah. Well, I don't know, well, kind of a semi-question would be how important these kind of categorizations are, but when you look at, I guess, the three kind of known or popular ways to, types of anti-Semitism, then the religious, the ethnic, and the, national perhaps. And then you mentioned kind of a fourth kind of inherent anti-Semitism that, my Ukrainian, very Zionist grandfather would say very brutally in Hebrew that they, suck anti-Semitism from their mom's tit. What do you do about, where do you place the anti-Semitic traits, the elements that don't necessarily fit in these three categories? For example, economic anti-Semitism, or traits that Jews are exclusive, that they're expansive, all the nasty stuff that you can say about us.
Well, I think the more time passes, the more opportunities we have to define yet another type of anti-Semitism. At the end of the day, it's all hatred, prejudice, of the Jews. And so maybe for academic or for more explanatory form to categorize that type of anti-Semitism, but at the end of the day, the results is exactly the same. It's exactly the same. And that's because I would venture to say that even if you respond to one category of anti-Semitism, you're not going to satisfy the anti-Semites. And so therefore, if you satisfy one category, let's say religious anti-Semitism, they're going to come up with racial anti-Semitism. If you satisfy the racial anti-Semitism, they're going to come up with economic anti-Semitism. Why? Because there is certain inherent and inborn anti-Semitism, unfortunately, exists.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Harry, then Aaron.
Thank you. Shalom. I would like to echo what my learned friend Noah said about you. This talk was very, very interesting. I would like to perhaps play devil's advocate. For those who know me, they'll know that's in character. But you said that the actions of Western governments in terms of restricting shechita and kosher slaughter is anti-Semitic, but I would say that, well, this is also affecting large parts of Western Europe's Muslim communities too, and so I'm not sure if it's entirely anti-Semitic, and I think this is a problem which affects various peoples, and I think we ought to exercise some caution when we use the term anti-Semitism. And I think when it comes to secular societies, and I'd be interested to hear your response on this, isn't it the case that the secularization of Europe has been the best thing for the Jews, for Jews and for others in Western Europe? That is universal human rights, justice for all, ensuring that society has a clear distinction between church and state. I would say that now, thanks to these progressions, it's never been a better time to be a Jew in Western Europe.
So your question is really a two-part question. So first, let me remind you that Muslims are also Semites, if we could use the term. Yes, they are descendants of Abraham, and Abraham comes from Sem, and that's where the name Sem, where Semitic comes from. But of course, when it was created in 1879 by Wilhelm Marr, he was referring to the Jews. So one, it is anti-Semitism, even if it's against Muslim Sharia law, it's still anti-Semitism. Secondly, Secondly, I might say that the secularization of Europe at this point, there is kind of an Islamophobia. So in a sense, they hitting two birds with one shot by prohibiting slaughter and circumcision for the Jews. They also prohibiting it for the Muslims at the same time. So it is, as I said, it's an anti-Semitism cloaked also with Islamophobia. Now, as to secularization, you are correct that secularization of Europe starting 200-300 years ago was the best thing that could have happened to the Jews. However, that did not save them from Nazi Germany, unfortunately, at all. It was the worst period and the worst incident and event of anti-Semitism in history. So that did not save them. Secondly, secularization is definitely going to the extreme. The pendulum has swung significantly to the extreme and did not settle in the middle, to the point where secularism has become a more stringent religion than maybe Christianity was in the Middle Ages. And so maybe it's called secularism, but it's, as I said before, it's a religion in itself. And so the problem is that it has swung completely to the extreme.
So Diane, Aaron, and Harris.
I do hope that you'll allow Dr. Small to publish a paper because I would like to assign it. I really enjoyed it. It was brilliant. Thank you. My question is really with what you are both talking about, this idea of secularism as religion and the moral law, this idea of hatred because of Jews bringing the moral law. You're all probably familiar with David Patterson's Metaphysical Origins of Antisemitism, and he talks a lot about that in the book, about this idea of God giving a law to Moses and to the Jewish people, and the Jewish people bringing it to the world, and the world hating Jews because of that law. So when you say that secularization has swung so far, the pendulum has swung so far to the extreme, I agree with you. I think you're absolutely right. I see it every day in the United States of America. I see it particularly in Christian schools, in one of which I work. And so how would you categorize, and I know categories are ever shifting and mutable, but based on the time in which we are today and what you just shared with us, how would you categorize this new religious tribalism with the understanding that secularization is a sort of religion, this extremity has become a sort of religion?
I'll tell you, unfortunately, the world is going in the wrong direction. Yes, there's tribalism, there is, in Africa we have seen now a lot of fights amongst the tribes. Even in Europe it's happening. In the United States, which is supposed to be a country of all of its citizens, we have been now seeing a lot of tribalism over there, maybe not with the term of tribalism, the very narrow interpretation, but the world is going that way, and because I feel the world is, with the globalization event that has happened in the last several years, but that globalization has become kind of not just counterproductive, but counterintuitive, that globalization is now causing tribalization of different groups and trying to find their intersectionality with different groups around the world. I don't know what the answer to how the world will be saved from that, but unfortunately I see the world not going in the right direction, at least the Western world. Where I'm living now, I see a brighter future. Ironically, that whole region is changing for the better, and unfortunately the West, I see it going into decadence. I don't know how long it's going to take, and if it will, I hope it won't, but from my vantage point, from where I am, I see coexistence, living together, respect for each other, respect for human rights, respect for other groups, independently of their religion, ethnicity, nationality, color, and whatever it is, and creed. And yet I see more and more divisiveness in the West. I don't know what the future holds.
Would you say that the West has become so progressive as to be regressive?
Absolutely, absolutely. And if we want to go about the wisdom that usually every empire lasts for an average of 240 years, the West has come, in a sense, to that end. Yes, it's unfortunate because the West is not just the United States. It is an empire of the West, I might say, including Europe. And that's already beyond 240 years.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. I really particularly liked your, the pattern of biblical anti-Semitism. I hadn't connected some of those dots, so I appreciate that. So my question is about Rabbi Jonathan Sachs and his characterization on the mutation of anti-Semitism. And you talked about religious, racial, economic, and then nationhood, anti-Zionism, and then I think Rabbi Sachs at the end talks about the new anti-Semitism as human rights. But so in this pattern, historic pattern, do you see, just one example, the racial aspect of anti-Semitism that he talks about in the 19th and 20th centuries? Does it seem that it's almost like a figure eight that we're returning to some of these historic patterns? For example, racial anti-Semitism now is, in the last 24 months, I've seen it, popping up since he made some of these statements, maybe a year before he passed. And now it seems that we're focusing again on racial anti-Semitism. The Jews are white colonialists, right? So I would just like your opinion on, are some of these patterns, coming back full circle?
Yeah, there is no question that it's a mutating virus, as Rabbi Sachs said. And the irony is that we were exterminated in Nazi Germany because we were not white, in a sense. And now we are persecuted because we are white privileged.
Right.
And so it is just to show us and to teach us that anti-Semitism just mutates because, unfortunately, the world has anti-Semites. And those anti-Semites, as I mentioned before, even if you respond to their brand of anti-Semitism and you show them how wrong they were or they are, somehow it mutates. They will find another reason why to be anti-Semitic. And so now it's just more convenient or more applicable or more popular to call the Jews white privilege, so they will have a target against them. They cannot call us non-white because we would be underprivileged and we would be protected and we would be part of those against the white privilege. But then there would not be anti-Semitism, and so therefore the anti-Semites of the world, they have to mutate also the reason. And yeah, and so that's what's going to happen. In Russia at the beginning they were against us because we were poor, then because we were communist, and then they were anti-Semitic because we were capitalist. And so now, no matter what we do, that's what I called at the end, there is an inherent inborn anti-Semitism. Where does it come from? I don't know. I have a religious idea about it which I will not share because I don't think it's shareable. But
please share.
No, I'm not sure. Briefly, very simple.
It's important.
Very simple is, in a sense, I really don't want it to become something controversial or anything like that. But in a sense, unfortunately, we Jews, when we forget that we are Jews, we assimilate and we disappear. So God sometimes needs to use some anti-Semites to remind us that we are Jews and to keep us Jewish. Otherwise, we will assimilate. And if we are supposed to be not the chosen people in a sense, but we're supposed to be the ones that brought monotheism into the world, the wisdom of God, so the disappearance of the Jews will be a great loss to the world. And so God, every once in a while, tends to remind us, don't forget.
And I think it's important because this is a Jewish perspective,
Yes.
a metaphysical component of anti-Semitism or Jew hatred that existed since almost the beginning. It's important to consider. So thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's always a pleasure to hear you speak, and as always, a wonderful lecture. I just want to make some comments if I can, and I think my comments were stirred on from Harry's questions. I think, first of all, a racist, bigot, xenophobe can both be anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim at the same time. And sometimes Muslims are anti-Semitic, sometimes are Muslims also anti-Muslim, in my opinion, but that's a different matter. I just want to take, if I may, with respect, just consider a term that you used and try to totally throw it in the bin, if I may. And that is the term Islamophobia. I've said this at Cambridge, I say it every year, and I will say it again, because to use the word Islamophobia, in my opinion, it's mainly the anti-Semites that use the word Islamophobia. Islam is a set of ideas, a set of values. I choose to, as a Muslim, accept an interpretation of a set of ideas, a set of values. I don't have to, and there are many. In a liberal secular democracy where I live, and thank God I do, and I'll come on to that in a minute why. In a liberal secular democracy, no set of ideas, no set of values should be beyond legitimate critique, satire, or criticism. However, no individual should be beneath dignity. So we should use, and thank God that currently in the UK, the current government agrees with us. We use the word anti-Muslim hatred and not Islamophobia. The other reason is that it's the anti-Semites, the far left, the far right, theocrats within my own religion, Islamists, I'll talk more about them in my lecture, use the word Islamophobia to deflect this legitimate criticism that is some of my fellow Muslims are guilty of. The other thing I will say that maybe I would reconsider whether Muslims are Semites or not. Muslims in the Middle East, who are native in the Middle East, may well be Semites. Maybe, but according to some definitions. I'm from Pakistan, from India. The largest number of Muslims in the world don't even speak Arabic. They're from Indonesia. There are converts, you'll meet converts here during the course. Paul Armstrong, who's the head of the oldest British Muslim organisation in the UK, Anglo-Saxon by tribe. Would he consider himself Semite? Would I a Semite? Would I? Where I would agree with you is that certainly I and all of the Muslims would consider ourselves spiritually children of Abraham. Definitely. Without doubt. So perhaps maybe that's something to think about. And the final thing about liberal secular democracy, why do I think it's the best thing for Muslims at the moment? And I'm talking about not secularization, but liberal secular democracies, where there is a separation between church and state, where each person is viewed through the lens of human rights and values equally. That's how it's meant to be. It's not always like that. But the idea of that, certainly for me, allows me to be the type of Muslim that I want to be. Otherwise, I would not be able to be my type of Muslim, which is traditional classical Islam, following Sufi traditions, here in the UK, which are the majority number of Muslims here. I would have to convert to one or another to be recognized as a Muslim. Just my thoughts.
Thank you very much. I agree with you on the term, but that was the only term that came to my mind at that moment. But if there is now a recognized term of anti-Muslim bigotry, I am with you on that. And when it came to being that Muslims are Semitic, I meant to say Arabs are Semitic. Correct, because Indonesian Muslims certainly are not Semitic. Even maybe some Moroccan Muslims are not Semitic. But Arab Muslims, they are Semitic. Correct. Thank you.
Deidre.
Thank you, Rabbi. I think we should always be clear about where we approach this material from. I teach in a religion program. I teach Jewish studies, and I'm often the public face of fighting anti-Semitism on my campus. So I listened to your talk with great interest because I think it expressed one of the tensions that I experience in my teaching and on campus and as a Jew, which is that you're voicing a Jewish perspective on this. And I think very much of the scholar Jacob Neuser, who talked about the Mishnah as the eternal present. You've given us the eternal present of anti-Semitism in your talk. And you've shown us how it's diachronic and it's also historical. And I guess what I'm struggling with as someone who needs to teach about this is how do we move between the perspective of Jews and Jewish tradition and Jewish experience and history? And we heard from Mrs. Landau as well today, like these are all our sources. And also thinking critically and scientifically and historically about this material. And I juxtapose that kind of concern against the reality that I'm on my own campus, the protest against IRA, which is ongoing, is being completely discussed without Jewish input and without Jewish perspectives. So I'm hearing your Jewish voice and your Jewish lens and your Jewish perspective, and knowing that we in secular universities need to speak also in academic ways. I just would like to hear your thoughts as you engage this material.
Right, so like in any other group, whenever a group feels being discriminated, I think we have to start with that group's understanding and feeling of that discrimination. And therefore we have to take that perspective because they're the only ones who feel that. They're the only ones who could describe the sentiments, the feeling of how they feel discriminated and things like that. So there's no question that there has to be a Jewish perspective in a discussion like that. Now that universities are not using that, it might be self-serving. It might be self-serving because they don't want to hear either the truth and they don't want to hear a voice that is going to contradict their position. So of course that there is kind of an interface between what the group feels and what the outside world is causing that feeling. Now sometimes that feeling might be exaggerated by the group, right? Well, the group that is causing that feeling may not have meant that much to me. And there have been certain misunderstandings with certain famous people as they utter a sentence and then they apologize about it. They know they didn't mean to say that, they didn't mean to say that, or they did not understand that that statement is very painful, it reminds the time of the Nazis, so on and so forth. And so communication, I think, is the best way to be able to both groups to understand each other. The group that is suffering that discrimination, that hatred, and the group that is dishing it out, so to speak, or the third group who is on a neutral basis, then they're trying to understand why is this considered anti-Semitism, how does that affect academia in general, and society in general. So there has to be communication. But the perspective from the group that is being discriminated is very important.
And just as a footnote, I find this fascinating. We have a postdoctoral research program at Cambridge, Chloe's a part of and Lev. And one of the things that we were doing this year is to try and create a framework to understand and combat anti-Semitism, a conceptual framework, and to understand and to analyze and to fight against it. And we've discussed what I view as the importance of using Jewish wisdom and Jewish perspectives in understanding anti-Semitism, understanding the wisdom that we have, fortunately, to understand and to combat anti-Semitism. And I think it's essential. And it's a whole long story, I won't get into it because there's a lot of questions, but I was very active in the anti-apartheid movement. And then my mentor was Professor Shengi Raghavan, who was you know Raghavan?
Yes.
Okay, so he was a refugee in the UK. He came to teach here, and he was a refugee, then went on to Canada, and he sent me here to do my studies. And he was one of the founders of the Black Consciousness movement. He conscientized Stephen Biko. And it was about learning about the wisdom in the culture, and perspectives and concepts that do not exist in Western thought, in Western education. And we have that. We're fortunate to have intact, profound wisdom and a Jewish heritage of ideas and perspectives. And I think that needs to be a part of the process. So I know you're struggling with it, but we should talk about it because I think this needs to really be empowered. And that your expertise is so crucial at so many levels. Yeah. So thank you. Tyrone.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much. I think it's important
that marginalized groups get to establish the parameters of the conversation. So I think that's an important dynamic. I'm interested to see, maybe I probably wouldn't have asked this, but because you use verses within Scripture, I feel like it's fair ground. So I'm interested to see how you would distinguish some of the verses reflecting anti-Semitism with the eternal witness of Torah, which seems to accredit at least some of these events not to anti-Semitism, but to their its own theodicy rooted in covenant disobedience. So you have like Deuteronomy 28, talk about you're going to go into exile because you didn't obey me, these curses, etc. Like how do you respond to that as a rabbi in that kind of within internal dialogue of in Judaism?
Right. So that's a very, very good question. And the answer that we theologians give is that God has planned for the world, correct?
Sure.
And in a sense, God might use messengers to bring His word and to bring the desired results that He's looking for. However, that does not take away from the responsibility of that messenger. We believe, at least in Judaism, that God has three keys. It has the key life and death, right? The key of sustenance, right? So these are the three keys: life, death, and sustenance. Each one of us is going to die one day. We hope to stay till 120 years. Now, some people die of old age, some people die of a disease, some people die of a car accident, some people die because they were shot. Now, are we going to absolve the shooter or the one who was driving the car and cause the death of that person because that was meant to be? And the answer is no. Why? Because God could have taken the life of that person through a disease or through old age or through whatever means God, wishes. But because that person caused the death of the fellow, then that person becomes responsible. So independently of what's the ultimate design of the creation and of the world by God, but we have the free will, and that's what God created us when it says, in the image of God, He created mankind. It's not the physical image because we know that God does not have a physique. That's the principle of monotheism. But in the liking in which we have wisdom to decide between good and bad, right and wrong, and the ability to have the free will and make those decisions. So because of the free will that we have, we become responsible for what we do, even though that might be the ultimate desire of God. I'll give you another example, a biblical example. You seem to know to know the Bible well. God told Abraham, for 400 years your descendants shall be strangers in a strange land, right, and they will be enslaved, right? And then they will leave with riches, and I will free them. So if that's the case, our sages ask the question, why is it that the Egyptians were so punished with the 10 plagues and the drowning in the sea if that was God's will? And the answer in many of the commentators is that the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians, took upon themselves not just to enslave the Israelites, as I mentioned, but to enslave them harshly. Okay. And the plan of God, there was nowhere where they would be killing the boys, killing the children. There was nowhere that they would beat them and harsh slavery and discriminate against them. That was not part. The only part was there would be an enslavement. An enslavement at that time meant an indentured servant, not necessarily slavery the way we know it today. And yet the ancient Egyptians took upon themselves to go much, 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 much beyond God's plan by discriminating, by harsh labor, by killing the children, so on and so forth. And so for that, they got punished in a sense, and not for the ultimate slavery, but for all the additions that they added from themselves. So again, to summarize, the answer to your question is God has His plan, but we are responsible because we have the free will, and that responsibility we have to pay for it.
Can I? I'm sorry. I teach post-Holocaust responses, and I feel like there's another layer that you can't leave on that note. That if you want to talk about God's will, you, at the moment of the Shoah, you can't talk about theodicy in the same way. You can't talk about responsibility and God's plan in the same way. And you need an extra footnote there.
No, absolutely, of course. And the footnote is that we humans have to take full responsibility of what we do and what happens. And we cannot say, well, that was God's plan. Absolutely. There's no question about that. There's no question about that, yes.
So Joel for the final question, and then we'll have our introductions.
So, thank you very much. Let me say that I'm Jewish, and my perspective is Jewish, but I'm a historian, I'm not a rabbi. So, honestly, I do not consider the Torah as an historical book. Definitely not. And all the research demonstrates when it was written. And I do not believe personally, but it's my personal, that I'm an historian, I'm a doctor in history, etc., and political science. I'm not sure that Abraham didn't exist, as I'm not sure that Romulus and Remus did exist, and I'm not sure that Aeneas of Troy did exist. So you cannot take the story written by people as historical facts. And it confuses you a lot, because you will make a confusion between the fact that, let's say, anti-Judaism and antisemitism, etc. And it brings you also to consider that Semitic races exist. You've got Semitic language, and it's Hebrew, Aramean, Arabs, but also Ethiopian and Tigrayan. And it has nothing to do, and you have to be careful, because what I try to teach to my students, please, races doesn't exist. You cannot say there is a Semitic race. Of course, you can speak a Semitic language, etc. So, and the same with the Book of Esther. The Book of Esther doesn't teach us about the Persian example, about the Persian history. It was written, as we know, as a historian, it was written during the Hashmonean time to describe the threat of Hellenism toward the Jewish people. So, it's nice what you said, but I'm not sure it's relevant. I'm sorry. I'm secular Jew.
Yes. Unfortunately,
and
that's the case. Yes, that's the case. But yes. Unfortunately, that is the case. But look, I respect your opinion,
and I respect yours.
And that's the way it should be. But the only thing I could say is just the existence of the Jewish people until today proves that the Bible is true. Now, independently of that, I analyzed what was written in the Bible, even if you want to take it as a book, even if you want to take it as a literary book. I analyzed events that were written in the Bible, if they were anti-Semitic or not, based on the description of anti-Semitism. Now, it happened or didn't happen to our discussion is irrelevant. Right? By my analysis is correct, because I was analyzing incidents that were written in the Bible. Now, independently, if you don't believe that the Bible existed or not, or you do, what I'm trying to say, if the stories in the Bible were real or not, but that's irrelevant, really, irrelevant. But to understand that those events were anti-Semitic,
I will question it tomorrow in my lecture.
Okay. But again, those events as they're written in the Bible. That's what I mean. Now, again, independently, if you believe the Bible, the truth, or the stories are true or not true. This is the Jewish perspective.
Because even if the stories aren't true, even if that's your stance, the culture writing the stories and inserting them into the document, that's an anti-Semitic coloring in the story. So even if you're looking at it simply as a work of literature, while the literature reflects the culture from which it emerges. So if the culture is writing those stories about Jewish people at that time, it's reflecting something, an attitude at that time.
Correct. Thank you.
So I think we're going to end it there. So on behalf of everybody here, Rabbi, thank you so much for your And we're very fortunate you're going to be around until Thursday.
Yes.
Amazing. So we'll have time to have discussions. Thank you. Thank you very much. You started us off on a brilliant note. So now we're going to go around the table. If everybody can be quiet for a moment. Sure. We're going to just go around and introduce ourselves to each other. We're going to be in this intensive program for 2 weeks, so you get to introduce each other to
Can
us.
we just, hold on a second, can we do a last thank you to Aliza? She's still on
Yes.
Zoom? Okay, last.
Aliza, you go ahead. You can go ahead. Aliza, thank you very much. Toda Rabbi.
Thank you, thank
Thanks for
you.
staying with us.
From the room, thank you so much, Aliza.
Okay, so before we get to introduce each other, I want to say we have 2 simple rules at ISGAP. We're known in the Summer Institute, we deal with very intensive issues. Sometimes they're controversial. We deal with Zionism or anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism, and in the current academic and intellectual environment, we're pushing against the grain. So some of you are coming from different perspectives. And we're from different disciplines, different parts of the world, different cultures, etc. So we are known at ISGAP to have ISGAP-only conversations. So everything goes on one condition. There has to be respect. That's it. You can debate, you can argue. If you disagree with each other, present your articles, present the authors and the intellectuals that you follow, and somebody else can counter with their articles and the perspectives that they follow. But there has to be basic, decent respect, and we are very much committed to the notion of academic freedom and intellectual exchange, really. So everything goes as long as there's respect, and that's the red line. I also have to say, for the first time ever at ISGAP, I also have to mention to everybody that when we are socializing and when we are interacting as intellectuals, there also has to be respect at the human level. And I have to say that all relations have to be consensual. We had a situation at one of our events for the first time in Cambridge that was really quite horrific. We are an organization committed to fighting discrimination of all kinds. And there has to be respect at the intellectual level and have these conversations, these ISGAP-only conversations, but also at the human interaction level, there has to be complete respect of boundaries and consent, and in this context we can have open and free conversations and interactions. So those are the 2 rules. Otherwise, it should be open, and I think we have amazing lectures, amazing content. We're dealing with issues that unfortunately are very timely. The increase of anti-Semitism internationally and other forms of bigotry is becoming more and more significant. It seems every Summer Institute, the situation internationally, particularly I guess in North America and Europe, is becoming more important. That scholars engage these issues with clarity and high caliber scholarship, and we are able to understand, shed light on it. As Henri Bernard Levy says, the role of an intellectual is to shed light where there's darkness, and through our understanding and analysis, hopefully to educate generations of students that are equipped to understand and combat all forms of hatred. And as Elie, who was our first president of ISGAP, a great professor and thinker and witness to the Holocaust, always taught that anti-Semitism is not a parochial issue, it's not a Jewish issue, it's not an Israeli issue. It begins with Jewish people, but it never ends with Jewish people. So we know from history, once this form of virulent hatred is released into society, it does not know any boundaries. So this is a human issue. Okay, so on these notes, I'll turn to Chloe. Please introduce, well, you've already introduced.
Yeah, I've already gone.
Okay. So Randolph, if you want to.
Hello, I'm Devin Randolph. I am a professor at the University of South Carolina. I work in the field of education, specifically elementary education, where I teach in-service and pre-service teachers. I'm also the director of the Anne Frank Center, where I work on special projects. And I met, I think Dr. Small and I met during my first time here at ISGAP, where Rabbi Melvin and I, we actually co-taught a course that looked at convergence and divergence between the African American and Jewish communities. So I'll be talking a little bit about some of my experience with that course, but also a course that we created for the University of South Carolina that looks at the life of Anne and Emmett, and looking at conversations and intersectionality between those communities and building upon that.
It's amazing that you came back.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me back.
I'm Professor Pamela Walker, and I'm a professor at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, where I teach modern and European history and mostly women's history. And with my colleague Deidre Butler, we're here to create a course on anti-Semitism for our undergraduates. And I also have other interests in terms of just thinking about anti-Semitism on university campuses. And if anyone else is interested in talking about the unfortunately famous Palestinian feminist statement against whatever it was, it came out last summer, and Women's Studies Department signed it by a sort of unnamed, allegedly Palestinian feminist organization, and it was signed by my department, and I have grave concerns about what that means for academic freedom and just the politics of that decision and my university's unwillingness to do anything about it, and also about how my colleagues through our faculty union are responding to the IRA definition and how that affects the life of our academic life on campus. So those are the things that bring me here.
And so I'm Deidre Butler. I'm also from Carleton University in Ottawa. And I'm really happy to have Pamela as an ally on campus, I've got to tell you. And I'm delighted that she'll be co-teaching this course with me. As I mentioned, I teach in a religion program. I'm a professor of Jewish studies. I mostly do modern things. I do a lot of work in the Holocaust. We just completed a very large bilingual, by that means English and French, project that teaches about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, centering oral histories. And so we have new oral histories from survivors, as well as translating and making older things from archives available. And so that's just coming online now. As the director of Jewish studies, I'm, as I said, the public face of dealing with anti-Semitism on campus. So I deal with our administration, I deal with our union, I deal with our students, and I'm teaching about it. And I've never been so alarmed in my life. I never expected in 2022 to be this concerned. I take students to Israel for an Israel travel course where I teach about religion in that land for over 5,000 years. I have petitions written against me. I'm not allowed to fundraise on campus. It's a nightmare. And most of my students aren't Jewish. And so I feel like I've become this activist scholar I had no intention of becoming. And so I'm very happy to be here and to have rich conversations with people from different backgrounds and different perspectives, as we just saw today.
Thank you. Tyron Laws from Chicago, Illinois. I'm a pastor, Christian pastor, but I'm also a recent PhD graduate. Dissertation focused on Messianism in Jewish studies and the Gospels, that some other things too, but I'm interested in this this convergence that I see of anti-Semitism, black nationalism, and some of groups like Hebrew Israelites, black Hebrew Israelites, and just kind of a larger conversation. So here just to learn and glean as much as I can for some potential projects. So I'm really glad to be here.
Well, my name is John Kotek. I have a French accent because I'm a Belgian. So. And I'm an historian, political scientist. I study in Paris.
Secular.
Actually, a secular Jew. Secular Jew.
A very polite one.
I hope so.
As long as you're not
I'm
going
inside.
as long as you're not going more to secularization.
Thank God, it's thanks to secularization that Israel exists. But let's say. And so I'm a specialist. I'm a specialist actually on cartoons and the chronology of anti-Semitism from the Middle Age till contemporary. So I wrote several books, and last book was on BDS, about the boycott, opposed against the boycott of Israel. So I'm very happy to be here. It's a privilege to be with you.
And Joel's participated, I think, in every summer institute, so it's great that you're here. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Romina Yalonetsky. I come from Lima, Peru, South America. I got my PhD in sociology, studying Jewish Peru. I'm interested in bigotry among minorities, coming from this post-colonial setting in which there are some similar things happening to what's happening in the Americas, in North America, but it's also completely different. So this whole minority status versus majority status, how Jews have become white, it's all very dependent on what's happening in North America, and then again, there are other racialized groups who are kind of anti-Semitic, and then there's also the phenomenon of Christian Zionism that's becoming very strong in Guatemala and Brazil and also Peru, and I'm really interested in that. So the coloniality of power, the role of Jews who are barely visible in a country like Peru, and class are issues that motivate me to be here today. Thank you.
I'm Meredith Mullahan. I'm finishing up postgraduate work on art crime and cultural heritage protection. I'm interested in crimes against cultural heritage in the context of genocide and conflict, and in the same sense, sexual violence against women in the same context. But I'm also the director of research for the Coalition for Jewish Values, which is a Jewish American think tank. It represents Orthodox rabbis, despite not being either Jewish or Orthodox myself. And in fact, also I work on women's and gay rights and speak on those issues. And I'm also the coordinator for this is a mouthful, but the International Religious Freedom Secretariat has a global campaign on anti-Semitism, and I'm the coordinator leader. And I also work more often increasingly with the Hazara minority from Afghanistan and in public advocacy for them.
Where did you do your PhD?
Oh, I don't have a PhD.
You're doing it now?
I'm doing a postgraduate certificate, which is measly compared to a master's.
Where?
Oh, Art Association for Research into Crimes Against Art in Italy.
Okay.
My name is Elie. It's a real pleasure to be here. I am a political scientist from the United States with a professional focus on European integration. I've been active in the women's movement there for over 40 years. Not there is a women's movement anymore, much of anywhere. And given the escalation of anti-Semitism in the United States, I've sadly had to shift my professional focus so much of the time from anti-Semitism in Europe to anti-Semitism in the United States.
Hi, my name is Nadia. I'm really excited to be here. I'm originally from Ukraine. I hold a PhD in linguistics and underwent postdoctoral fellowship in Jewish studies, specifically Jewish movement in Soviet Union and international campaign to support Soviet Jewry. And I researched different women campaigns in this historical period. Currently, I serve as a director for strategic project development in Ariel University in Israel, and as a part of World Zionist Congress, I'm responsible for different educational activities. So I will be happy to share with you, my experience in anti-Semitism in Ukraine, in countries of former Soviet Union, and as well as kind of anti-Semitism that we also handle in Israel. And happy to be here.
I'm Isabella Twarovsky, and really excited to be here as well. I come at all of this from a perspective of Russian history, and in my job actually doesn't have to do with Jewish issues, but it has to do with Russia and Ukraine. I work for the Wilson Center, which is sort of a think tank in the U.S. But I now live in Israel. But anyway, my research interests center also around Soviet Jewry, but increasingly, really, the issue that over the last several years has occupied me is the question of how contemporary left reproduces with stunning fidelity the speech patterns, the explanatory logic, the exact slogans of Soviet anti-Zionism. And I find it extraordinary, and I find it really important. And this is what I write about, and this is what I talk about. And I think that one of the things that I find so interesting is how the experience of Soviet Jewry has been so forgotten. And it's 70 years, right, of millions of people. And like even in today's conversation, it was really interesting. When we talk about secularization of Jewry and how that making fun of Jews for being backward, for following their religion, that's the Soviet Union, 1919, 1920s and onwards, profound effect on Soviet Jews, on Russian-speaking Jews to this day. There is an effect on why are Russian-speaking Jews having such a hard time a lot of times connecting to religion. It's that campaign of deep, profound, sort of making fun, ridiculing religion. Anyway, I'll touch on some of that in my lecture, but I'd love to, I'm really excited to be here and meet everyone. Looking forward.
Hi, I'm very excited to be here. My name is Sara Galico. I am from Mexico City, and I am an educator and a teacher. I'm also a writer. I love to write about current events, and I specialize in Holocaust education. And I am a community activist. I am a member of the Jewish community, so I do a lot of work for the Jewish community in my country. And I am also a member of the Jewish Diplomatic Corps of the World Jewish Congress. And I'm excited about this program, so thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Felix Marita. I came here from the Netherlands, where I'm partly based, but also I'm attached to the University of Rwanda, where I'm an associate professor. I have a legal background, so I did international law, some of the new religion, human rights, something. But my focus has really been, and I have published quite a few things around very easy question of identities in Africa. And you will hear irony here. Yeah, so I have published quite a lot of discourses on indigeneity, minority, and but also more recently issues around identity and belonging. And recently I had a talk with also ISGAP on my latest publication on issues of hate speech in the African West region, particularly in the relations in Eastern Congo and the troubled relation with Rwanda and the Kinyarwanda-speaking population in the country, with a very complex, of course, colonial legacy around all of that. That has been my focus on my current work, and also partly my interest in being here, of course, connecting more of that work I'm doing with the wonderful work ISGAP doing around raising awareness on antisemitism. So mine is a perspective which is comparatively richer, more here to learn more about, of course, antisemitism. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Hi, my name is Sarah Diane. I'm still a student, so no PhDs for me yet. I am very passionate about antisemitism, specifically in the form of anti-Zionism and demonization of Israel. It started mostly in 2021 when there was the uprising of the Israel-Palestine conflict. I live in Montreal, Quebec, and things were very, very heated. I think what boiled my blood the most was how neglected anti-Semitism was and how it was always allowed because it was in the name of anti-Zionism and Israel is always the devil. So it doesn't bother me as much. It bothers me a lot that it's neglected, but also sometimes it's in power, especially in the United States, in the hands of like Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and stuff like that. I took a course on anti-Semitism this past semester, and my teacher saw my comments and how passionate and outspoken I was about it, so she recommended me here. And I'm really happy to be here so I can learn about it, speak about it, and defend Israel, being well-versed and well-educated.
Welcome.
Hello, my name is Cindy Seaton-Rogers. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Texas at Dallas, where I'm fortunate enough to have Dr. David Patterson very, I've had the privilege of working with him for 13 years, and now he's chairing my dissertation committee. So he has been a major force in bringing me here, but also in kind of forming and tweaking the direction of my studies. And now my dissertation focuses on looking at medieval and historical tropes and iconography of anti-Jewish representations and misrepresentations and the ways in which those are now used today in anti-Semitic discourse and propaganda.
I need more introduction.
I suppose not, but I'm just working on another complete for me. My name is Ben Ruda. I just finished my undergraduate degree at the State University, where I studied under Dr. Rabbi, who will be speaking tomorrow, and Dr. Beller, who is also associated with ISGAP. I studied Middle Eastern Studies and psychology, specializing in the psychology of intergroup conflicts and group dynamics. And I'm currently writing my thesis on resentment as the primary motivator for modern hatred and group conflicts. And I really look forward to sort of mining that topic and fleshing out my concepts through the topics that we're going to be talking about here.
Hello, my name is Asher Wexler. I am a rising sophomore at UC Chapel Hill in North Carolina. Last year, my freshman year, there was an incident where a professor teaching a course about Israel and the Palestinian conflict surfaced that she was about anti-Zionist, and there was a whole controversy about that. And some of my friends took the class to intentionally drop it in protest. And so there's a lot of things happening. I think that was a catalyst towards my interest in the academic study of anti-Semitism, the way that anti-Semitism can manifest on university campuses. And also that incident, along with my time studying at the Maimonides program with the Tikva Institute, is also a very formative, beautiful time. So yeah, really looking forward to engaging in community of ideas, like so many different perspectives. I was inspired to come here through Professor Ansel Brown, who goes to my synagogue back home. Really, really lovely man. Yeah, super excited.
Hello everyone, my name is Samantha Wampold, and I'm from Seattle, Washington. Currently I'm an undergraduate student at the University of Washington, which is also in Seattle. And I am majoring in Middle Eastern Studies and minoring in Hebrew. Last semester, I studied abroad at Tel Aviv University, where I took classes tailored towards my major. And this past year, I was a fellow for Camera on Campus, where I wrote articles on certain events that happened with the SJP at my school, University of Washington, and events that happened at Tel Aviv University. I'm really excited to be here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Noah. I'm, of course, very, very excited to be here, and also kind of nervous and a bit shy. But so I'm currently undertaking a master's in history at the University of Bergen, Norway. I'm specializing on writing my master's thesis on Jewish reactions to anti-Semitism in Norway after 1945. And my research, that's kind of a follow-up also from my BA that I did at University College London in Viking and Old Norse studies of all things. But I got very much into contemporary anti-Semitism in the academia, on campus, and in our lives has been something that I was quite engaged in. I took the role of president of the Friends of Israel Society on campus. I worked with Stand With SDK. And I've got to say, I wasn't gonna say this here, but actually since everybody's been talking about it, the environment on campus in Norway is very interesting. And I'm really hoping, well, of course I feel very, very privileged and honored to be here and, you know, to observe and talk to everybody here. And I think this would be very informative and useful. I'm also in the process of PhD applications in the UK, and it's really interesting to see what we can do and how we can talk about anti-Semitism. Well, none of us needs to be convinced that, you know, anti-Semitism is bad, and we have a lot to discuss. But I think we're up for a very, very fruitful 2 weeks. So thank you so much.
Great. Hi everyone, I'm Harry Saul Markham. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm somewhat of a rarity here because not only am I British, I'm also from Essex. I'm not sure there's any other Essex people here. So I study at UCL, I study history and Jewish history, University College London. And like Noah here, I am the president of, just actually finished my presidency of the UCL Friends of Israel Society. Now, I do lots of things. One of those things is I am on the advisory board for an organisation, Academics for Academic Freedom. We upset lots of people, including Jews, because we give everyone a platform and we defend everyone's right to speak. I was a critical thinking fellow at the Elie Foundation, so we did lots of work for women's rights, rights of LGBT people, and we gave particular attention to the issues that people don't really give enough attention to. So issues pertaining to FGM, the persecution of Christian communities throughout the Middle East and North Africa, and so on. And following on from a very terrifying incident outside Downing Street last year, in which a group of Jewish activists, which included my mother and myself, we were very nearly lynched outside Downing Street by an Islamist mob. I'm working on a book project at the moment, which I have almost finished but not quite, which explores really how multiculturalism in Western Europe has failed Jews, how this idea hasn't really worked for Jews, how we have failed to assert our values and challenge Islamism in the UK and Western Europe, and how if we don't do something about this, we will see a rise in far-right populism. And as an activist for the Social Democratic Party, this terrifies me, and I think that's why we as Social Democrats need to reclaim the conversation on multicultural integration. We need to build what Roger Scruton termed as the inclusive nationalism and reclaim identity. So yeah, that's what I kind of do. And also, Zionists, a lot of Zionists don't like me because they think I dissent from many Zionist historiographies and Zionist orthodoxies, and anti-Zionists don't like me because I'm this raging Zionist. So I think I'm doing something right. Yeah.
I already went, but
My name is Aaron Free, and did my undergraduate in Bible and Theology, and my master's at Wheaton College, your alma mater. Taught at Wheaton College Christian education for a season, and then became a Christian pastor. And like my historian Jewish friend across the table, I myself am a wandering Jew. My dad was Jewish, and my great-grandparents escaped the Bolsheviks' revolution, crossing that's Belarusia, came to California where I was raised. And so when my father was killed, my Orthodox Jewish grandmother raised me, but like you, I'm a wandering Jew, right? So I became a Christian pastor, and I was trained in replacement theology and supersessionism triumphalism, and which is the church has replaced Israel. We've triumphed over Israel. Christianity has replaced the Jew. And so a Christian pastor with Jewish roots is speaking and teaching replacement theology. Long story short, 2002, I'm sitting in my pastor's chair, evangelical pastor. We had 120 employees at the church. I'm Captain Kirk, in the driver's seat, balancing all the plates, not thinking about...
Who is my cousin?
Oh, Captain Kirk, really? Okay.
That's interesting.
No, is that true?
That's what I said.
Anyway, so long story short, I'm sitting in my office, and all I can say is the God of Abraham walked into my office and said, "You're a Jew. Go find your family." And so most of my family died in the Holocaust, but there were some left in Tel Aviv. So I found my family in 2002, which just opened up this journey of writing books, articles on you know.
Sorry to interrupt you. In which form God of Abraham walked into your
In my heart.
Just wanted to
It
use
wasn't
as
a visual.
proof that God exists.
It's a metaphor.
We can get into a whole discussion of why I believe God exists. Anyway, so this started the journey, and so after 35 years of being an evangelical pastor, about 6 or 7 years ago, I stepped down and I launched a nonprofit called Israel Team Advocates. And so what we do is we advocate for Jewish existence. Because it became very dark for me the last couple of years fighting anti-Semitism, growing anti-Semitism within Christianity and on Christian college campuses. And so, so now I just say I'm fighting and advocating for Jewish existence rather than the negative of fighting against something. And so I did some work up at Wheaton College where I met my esteemed colleague, Dr. Martin, and so she introduced me to Charles, and he interviewed me at Christmas time. My grandsons, Asher and Levi, were running through the house, so I had to go sit in my closet where he interviewed me and talked to me and invited me to come this summer. And so that's what I do. So my niche is because I can say these things to the Christian world because of my background. And so I don't talk so much about my Jewish background. I don't mention it a lot because I want the opportunity to be able to say this to the Christian world, without pushback. Well, you're a Jew, you have Jewish lineage, and that's why you say these things. So there is right now, especially in America, and it is global, there's a rise of Christian nationalism, which is very, very dangerous and very lethal. And whenever you mix piety with political ideology, it has never gone well for Jews in this world. And so that is happening right now in America, the rise of Christian nationalism. Prominent Christian figures are now saying we need to remove Jews from the public square and remove, someone said just 2 weeks ago that Ruth Bader Ginsburg had to die. I don't know if you saw this, but she had to die so that a Catholic, Amy Coney Barrett, could become on the Supreme Court, and that just proves we don't need Jews in public office. So this was a prominent Christian evangelical that said this. So that kind of thing is on the rise, and so what we do in our organization is we address this. I write weekly now for Times of Israel, which is the Post, addressing these issues within growing anti-Semitism within Christianity and the rise of replacement theology in the academy. And Wheaton College, for example, I'll close with this. Dr. Gary Burge, I don't know if he was there when you were there, but probably the leading evangelical scholar. And there's great, scholars that are talking now, teaching on replacement supersessionism. And so he says in his book, Whose Land, Whose Promise? He questions that do the Jews actually belong in the land? And his answer is no. The Jews need to be pushed out of the land of Israel totally. And so he uses John 15:6, a scripture used during the Inquisition to burn Jews alive. And he said, according to John 15:6, if Israeli Jews do not convert to Christianity, they're good for nothing and they should be cast into the fires and burned. And so this kind of language is rising within the academy in America. So that's what we do, is we address this on campuses through presentations, articles, and that's it.
And I would say that if you ever have the opportunity to just chat with him over coffee and find out how he found his Jewish family in Israel, it will stupefy you. It will stun you.
Aaron, it's amazing that you're here. We're honored that you're here. I'll just say one thing about the Wandering Jew. I think thanks to our secular Jewish tradition and the wisdom of our religious or the Torah tradition, we're not wandering, we're returning.
That's good.
And we have a home, thank God, or thank Herzl.
Of course.
Thanks, Herzl.
Hi, I'm Sharon Free. I'm Aaron
Rabbi. I'm actually an educator, my PhD from the University of Illinois, but my area of research has been promoting health equity, fighting health disparities. And I'm an associate dean for research at the University of South Alabama. And I'm a grant writer, so now I help with research grants for health, health training. But now I'm really working on grants for my husband's nonprofit. So I thought it'd be great to come and learn more, read all that he does, and I love it. So I'm transitioning maybe next year to retire, and I'd love to work with him and help and become much more knowledgeable. So thank you for allowing me to come.
Thanks for being
May I just ask a question? So is there now a schism in the evangelical Christian movement between Pastor Hagee and...
Okay, so a schism. So you
with
have,
their point of view of Israel and the Jews, I mean.
yeah, so you have
Because Pastor Hagee is extremely
Zionist, yes. Okay, but you have
We're
the,
gonna talk about that in our lecture. I am Diane Martin. My PhD work is in cultures, languages, and literatures with a focus heavily on cultures and literature. I'm an English professor at Wheaton College. Met intersecting there. I had always thought all Christians loved Israel and were totally pro-Israel. And I had no idea there was a schism in the community until I arrived at Wheaton College and read my first freshman undergraduate research paper on, the evils of Israel, and it shocked me. And I have one of my degrees in Holocaust literature. I've been teaching Holocaust literature since 1999. I'm very passionate about it. I'm 2% Jewish. Does that count? On my mom's side. So I've always had this burning passion for Israel and for the Jewish people. For the Torah.
And your name.
And my name, my black father in the tiny little, the magnificent island of Jamaica where I was born in 1968, so now you know how old I am. I don't know how, but he named me after Moshe Dayan. So my name has this weird spelling, D-Y-A-N-N-E, and my whole life I hated it. Everybody called me Wayne. I'm a girl. Really a girl. And I was complaining one day to my dad about why did he pick that name, and he said, "Oh, well, I named you after the wonderful and great Moshe Dayan." And I was like, "Oh, I love my name." They can call me Dwayne. I don't care anymore. So I have been very, very blessed to be allowed to teach Holocaust literature at Wheaton College, and so I have this opportunity to kind of expose students to the other side of the argument, to give them all of the, here's what these people are saying, but let's look over here. Let's look at the literature, let's look at the articles, let's look at the history. ISGAP was revolutionary for me last summer. I was here as a scholar in residence, and it transformed my curriculum. It enabled me to give so much more of an enriched education to my Holocaust literature students. The things, I thought I knew a lot. I knew nothing. And ISGAP showed me that, but ISGAP stepped in and filled the gap with what I didn't know. So if this is your first time here, you're not going to want to go home. You're going to want to go back as soon as it ends. You're not going to believe how much you're going to learn, how useful it is, and how much your colleagues, your students, your social network, your family, how much all those people in your circles are going to benefit from what you learn here. Every single thing that you learn here is valuable. And so I'm really excited to be back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Christine Maxwell. I'm going to wear my British hat today. I'm also French and American. And I came here last year for the first time. And I too second everything that you have said. My background is very eclectic in that I did Latin American studies and sociology in America, university, and then I ended up doing grade school teaching in the UK and some teaching in the United States in California. And I worked for many years in a scientific and educational publishing company, and that led me eventually into the arena of online search. And I have been working in that field for over 40 years as an internet entrepreneur. and I don't know how to code my way out of a paper bag, but I do know how to force engineers to make something in using technology that really ordinary people can use without having to put the computer hat on, which I detest. So I'm here because in my own fields, I've been very fortunate in being able to work with the idea that emerging technologies can really inspire new ways of thinking and the posing of different questions within Holocaust studies, within contemporary anti-Semitism studies, and my own recent doctoral research sort of revealed to me how deeper knowledge and broader understanding of the book as both a text and object could lead to a new relevancy of Holocaust literature. So my work since my PhD work has moved into really the study of how can one present a novel conceptual analysis of related texts, and in this context I'm talking about the Protocols of the Learned Men Elders of Zion, and really trying to come up with I'm in the middle of building an online course. It's called Following Protocol, which is very much a play on words, and I'm looking at how to really, in the context of using technology, how can one really find new ways of tackling this absolutely horrendous piece of propaganda. So one of the things that I'm very much looking forward to in being here this time around is conversations and discussions with as many people as possible who might be able to help me in the actual content arenas of the thematic approach that I've taken to dismantling the big lie, as we call it. So, whether it be education, finance, human rights, politics, practice, propaganda, race, ethnicity, and religion, I am absolutely longing to see where I am able to be in these 2 weeks. So thank you for having me, and I'm delighted to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm Romy Wolfson from South Africa, for those that can't identify the accent. Really excited to be here. I'm an attorney, and I actually first came into contact with ISGAP and Charles by accident. I was doing a course on international human rights law at Oxford, and a friend of mine said, do I want to go hear Natan Sharansky speak? And I was so excited because he's like an absolute mentor and idol for me. So I was like, yes, I'm definitely going. And I met Charles, and it was something that was definitely on my bucket list to do. So I helped set up the legal department of the South African Zionist Federation to do basically lawfare and defending Israel and the Jewish people from a legal perspective. So working against like antisemitism, BDS, delegitimization of Israel, and also South Africa being the home ground of apartheid, something that we're not proud of, but so that that claim has a very strong ground in South Africa. So unfortunately, never had the opportunity to study anti-Semitism at university in South Africa. I don't think it would have been a subject that would have been approved. But I did study Holocaust literature as part of my undergrad doing English. So I would love to chat to you. Yeah, English. Yeah, go English. And just really excited to learn from all of you. I'm also part of the World Jewish Congress. I know someone else is JD. Yeah, hello. And I'm also doing the World Zionist Organization Leadership Academy, and just looking forward to learning from you all. Thank you.
I'll just say one quick thing about South Africa,
yes.
as connect there. So the apartheid system was actually, I was born in Canada. Canada was the foundation of apartheid. Verwoerd and Smuts, the founders of apartheid, toured the reservations of Canada. And they saw how the Canadians treated the indigenous people, and they went back inspired and created the apartheid state and lost. So Canada played a role.
Oh God.
Anyways.
Hello, I will be very brief, because I'm sure everyone is starving. I know I am. My name is Ben M. Freeman. The M is important because there's like a million Jewish Ben Freemans. I am an author and educator. I've taught what I would call primary, so elementary I guess, secondary/high school and university, all at the same time, which was a challenge. And my work really focuses on combating Jew hatred, discussing Jewish identity and teaching about the Holocaust. My second book is about to come out, which forms part of a Jewish Pride series, which uses my experience as a gay person kind of battling internalized homophobia, dealing with the issue of pride and kind of giving that, I guess, to the Jewish people. So yeah, that's what I do. That's who I am.
The last person who's not been introduced, Professor Braun.
Hi folks, I'm Gabriel Noah Bram, Gabi Bram, University of Haifa Institute for the Study of Zionism, Senior Research Fellow. It's 40 degrees back home in Tel Aviv and it's rocket season, so I'm just here to get away from it all and looking forward to working with you.
All right.
Until leave during this meeting.
Really?
What did you say?
What's that? Yeah,
What was it?
it's
What did you
firing
say?
over Tel Aviv as we spoke. A lot. So checking on your friends.
Oh God.
Is there damage?
No, they canceled the ceasefire. They canceled the ceasefire, yeah?
Cancel culture strikes again.
More rockets.
Elsie, is there any logistical announcements?
So sessions will meet here,
Yeah.
unless told otherwise, so there'll just be 1 or 2 sessions in the auditorium. But meet here for our first session tomorrow at
9:30.
9:30?
9:30.
We're also-
Breakfast is in the dining room, which is
So 1 second, everyone.
the building to your left. Looks like a church. That's the dining hall.
No.
Breakfast and lunch will be served.
No dinner. Yeah.
Give us a moment. We'll give you some suggestions for dinner. Daphne.
Hello. Just a few last announcements. Breakfast is from 8 to 9, so put your alarms on because they won't serve it after. Another thing, we're going to be sending emails with more information, so please try to open our emails. If you see one from El Shaddai or me, please open it. I swear it's not a repetition every day. There's usually useful information in there. So yeah, just emails. You have my WhatsApp. Call me anytime.
It may be good to have a WhatsApp group too.
I sent.
Give those to us electronically.
Okay.
We
and
do have
for-
that, yeah. I'll
for
send it to
dinner,
you.
we're pretty centrally located. So there's Corn Market Street, which is a few minutes, 5-minute walk. There's a place called Pizza Express, that's sort of gourmet pizza. There's a place called Al Shami. It's a Lebanese restaurant that's very good. It's about a 15-minute walk. You can Google it. And we're near the Westgate Shopping Center. There's a Lebanese restaurant there. It's lower scale but good.